Very good morning and welcome to the London Assembly's Mayor's Question Time meeting. In accordance with government regulations, we are holding this meeting on a hybrid basis with some Assembly members here in the chamber and others participating remotely. Members of the public are able to access this meeting online, and I'd like to extend welcome to the multimedia journalist students from Westminster University watching the webcast this morning. Welcome to the journalist on this occasion. Can I ask the clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm the names of the Assembly members who are present at this meeting and any apologies for absence, please? Rebecca.
Good morning, Chair. We have apologies for absence on behalf of Gareth Bacon MP and Florence Eshalomi MP and Nikki Gavron AM. We also have with us in the chamber Assembly members Bailey, Devonish, Duval, Curtin, Pigeon, Russell and yourself, Assembly Member Shah. And joining us virtually, we have Assembly members Berry, Boff, Cooper, Desai, Dismore, Paul, McCartney, Moore, O'Connell, Prince, Qureshi, Dr Sahota, Whittle and Arbour, and we are expecting Assembly Member Arnold to join us virtually shortly as well.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. We now move on to my announcements for today. Earlier this month, Sergeant Matt Ratana was tragically killed in Croydon. I send my deepest condolences to the officer's family, friends and colleagues at this time. For an officer to die whilst on duty is heartbreaking, especially when they put their lives at risk every day for Londoners. No one should go to work and question whether they will make it home. Police officers work tirelessly to keep our city safe. Their bravery never goes unnoticed. October is Black History Month, a time to reflect and celebrate the incredible contribution that the black communities bring to London. From history to heritage, food to culture, science to writers, the black community enriches our city and makes it a better place. With the Black Lives Matter movement that we have witnessed in London and across the world, this month should act as a reminder to us that racism is still prevalent in our society. We all have a part to play in standing up to racism and work for real equality. So, it's time to move on from lip service to structural changes. The Health Committee wrote to the Mayor of London to highlight the issues that some Londoners cannot book or get at home tests for COVID-19 as they are invisible on the credit system. Londoners get in touch with the London Assembly to say that when they try to book or get a home COVID-19 test, they must complete a TransUnion credit check on the gov.uk website. It is estimated that 5.8 million people in the UK are invisible to the credit system because they have little or no credit record in this country. The Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning and Housing Committee wrote to the Mayor of London on the problems facing Londoners who are finding themselves unable to move or remortgage their homes due to difficulties obtaining EWS1 forms. The letter asked the Mayor how he could use his adult education budget to help combat the shortage of specialist skills needed to tackle the unsafe cladding issues which is impacting thousands of Londoners across our city. And finally, I'm sure the Assembly would like to join me in congratulating all Londoners and GLA family colleagues who received awards in the Queen's Birthday Honours List. In particular, I would like to congratulate Mike Brown, MVO, CBE, former Commissioner of Transport for London, who received his honour for service to transport, as well as all those who received honours as a result of their commitment to keeping us safe during the pandemic. Moving on to the next item, which is declarations of interest. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out in the report at item 2?
Read.
Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interest or other relevant interests which they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Okay, thank you.
Noted.
None. Next item is the minutes. Can I ask the Assembly to confirm the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on 10th of September and the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting held on 17th of September to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We now move on to the Mayor's report. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from 4th of September to 1st of October? The Mayor will now provide an oral update up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Mr. Mayor, over to you.
Good morning, Chair. Can I begin with an apology for being slightly late? No discourtesy was intended. And hopefully during the course of the morning later on you'll understand why I was held up. Good morning. Since the last Mayor's Question Time, we tragically lost one of our police officers in London, Sergeant Matt Ratana, who paid the ultimate price for helping keep our city safe. Incidents like this are a reminder of the dangers our brave police officers face every single day. Matt Ratana was an example of the best of our city. And I know I can speak on behalf of the GLA and London when I say our hearts go out to his family, friends and colleagues at this difficult time. Chair, we're at a critical moment in our fight against COVID in London. The virus is spreading rapidly in every corner of our city. We'll soon reach an average of 100 cases per 100,000 people, with a significant number of boroughs already over that threshold. Hospital admissions are up, more patients are going to intensive care units, and sadly, the number of Londoners dying every day is increasing again. It's my expectation that the government will today announce that London will shortly be moving into Tier 2, or the high alert level of restrictions. I've had a meeting this morning with the Secretary of State for Health and MHCLG, as well as London leaders and scientific advisors. Final conversations with ministers are ongoing around this as we meet, but I expect ministers to make an announcement to Parliament later this morning. This move is based on the expert public health and scientific advice about what is necessary to save lives in the capital. In addition to the restrictions already in place, this would mean different households in London not being able to mix indoors. Nobody wants to see more restrictions, but this is deemed to be necessary in order to protect Londoners by myself, London Council leaders and by ministers. As part of our discussions, I've also made clear to the government that we need more financial support for London's businesses, workers and public services as we face more restrictions, and I'll continue to make this case. Given how far the virus has already been allowed to spread, and given the government's complete failure to get a working test, trace and isolate system in place, I believe we also need action on a national scale, just as the government's own scientific advisors have recommended. That's why I'll continue to call for a short national circuit breaker. This could save thousands of lives, drive the virus down to manageable levels, and give the government more time to finally get a grip on its failing test and trace system. In London, we experienced the worst of COVID-19 back in the spring. Thousands of lives were lost, and our economy has been left reeling. We simply can't afford for the government to be slow to act again. The supposed choice between saving the economy and saving lives, between restrictions and freedoms, is an entirely false one. Because the later we take the necessary steps to slow the spread of the virus, the more severe these steps will have to be, and the longer they'll have to last in order to drive down infection rates. No matter how much some people want to pretend otherwise and bury their heads in the sand, the truth is that the health crisis and the economic crisis are inextricably linked. That's why getting the virus under control is the only way we can both protect lives and our economy. There's simply no other option. I must warn Londoners that we've got a difficult winter ahead. But just as we've always done throughout our city's great history, I know will get through this dark time by pulling together. So I'd urge all Londoners to continue to follow the rules so that we can support our NHS, save lives and protect our economy. Thank you, Chair. I've also been asked for an oral update from Senator Member Hall. As the handling of this investigation is an operational matter for the police and the case is live, it's not for me to take a view on the case. As with all investigations of this kind, the Metropolitan Police Service will need to take into account the fundamental right to free speech. I am able to provide a factual update on the progress of the investigation. On the 4th of July, the MPS was passed an allegation from Durham Police of a public order offence relating to a social media video posted on the 30th of June. The matter was reviewed by officers, and on 29th of July, a file was submitted to the Crown Prosecution Service for early investigative advice. On the 25th of September, the CPS provided some advice and officers began an investigation. The MPS is an investigation because the video is believed to have been posted from an address in London. No arrests have been made and the case remains under review.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two indications so far of Assembly colleagues wanting to come in. Can I invite Assembly Member Russell, please? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, very briefly, Mr. Mayor, I just want to pick up on one point that was actually in your letter to the Prime Minister this morning that went out on Twitter, which is the point about people needing to pass credit reference checks in order to access home testing. Otherwise, they have to use walk-in or drive-through testing facilities, which I agree with you is hard for older and disabled people, and particularly people without access to a car. Isn't this a gap you can resolve through our transport services? Have you thought about supplying COVID-secure taxis so that people without cars can get to testing centres? Many taxis are sitting idle at the moment because there isn't the volume of work. I was talking to the LTDA about that just yesterday.
TfL Chair are currently in negotiations with the DFT, and you'll be aware of the conditions attached to us in relation to any additional expenditure. But I'm happy to pass on to the negotiating team the suggestion made from the Assembly member about the possibility of doing just that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Next is Assembly Member Boff. You indicated.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you referred to the support that you were looking for from the government. Your developments at Outer London stations require TfL to provide funding upfront in order to be a development partner. These have stalled due to the state of TfL's budget. Will you be using any bailout from the government to restart these schemes, or will the bailout only be used to resolve operational issues?
Thank you, Chair. If I've missed the beginning of the question, I get my answer wrong, I'm really happy to add more time on, Chair, with your permission. The short answer, Senator Boff, is the government, and I can't comment on the ongoing negotiations for the second half, but all capital projects must come to a pause unless there are contractual commitments or a significant amount of money has been spent and it's towards the end. And so if it's the case that any project hasn't begun, there's a pause until situations around the second half are resolved. And I'm afraid we aren't going to get into the longer term or medium term resolution yet. I hope I've not misunderstood the question, Chair.
You're almost there, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to figure out, will you be asking for a bailout to support TfL's property portfolio or solely for operational issues?
I beg your pardon, Chair. For all capital investment, not just operational issues, because a lot of the capital investment is crucial for the current service we have, but also going forward. But also it fits in with the government's agenda, which I support, about supporting jobs and shovel-ready projects. So that's included in the package of ours.
Thank you for that answer.
Right, Mr. Mayor, I have two further indications on your oral update. Can I invite Assembly Member Barry with your question, please?
Thank you, Chair. Again, referring to the letter that you sent to the government, there's a lot in there about the possible crisis of people's incomes and poverty and destitution. And you talk about expanding universal credit, child benefit. You talk about the concern that the lowest paid workers on the new arrangements would fall below the minimum wage. You talk about food poverty issues as well. Is this not the time for a strong, united call from London for the government to short-circuit the complexity of all this, and alongside the circuit breaker, bring in a universal basic income that would stop anyone from falling through these gaps?
Well, Chair, just a second first, but I think there's an issue with the sound quality for
I
those.
have asked them
fine.
to raise the volume.
The short answer, Senator Berry, is I think the government should be extending the furlough scheme that was in the first part of the spring summer, which some people characterise as universal basic income. The problem with the government's current plans are any additional financial support only comes in tier 3 at the very high level, and even when it comes in then, as you suggest, it's not even at the previous levels of what it was. It's less, it's 2/3 basically speaking. People don't get to pay 2/3 of rent or get 2/3 of the bill when they go to buy food or other expenses. And so, in my view, and it's a view shared, by the way, cross-party from other colleagues around the country, the government should be replicating the scheme they had in the first lockdown in tiers 2 and tiers 3. And that's one of the things we're lobbying for going forward. Some people call the furlough scheme a universal basic income. I'm not really sure I want to get into that debate at this stage. I'm not sure if time allows it. But I think, in these times of crisis, it's really important for individuals, families and businesses to be supported.
Very much.
Mr. Mayor, are you able to hear questions clearly? I had difficulties. I've asked them to raise the volume a bit, but are you okay with now?
Yeah, it was difficult to hear Senator Boff, but I heard Senator Berry a bit better, but it's not as loud as it has been in the past, but hopefully it'll improve as the temperature heats up.
It is.
Ain't going to happen then, is it?
I know, unfortunately, we can't do
Gets
anything
colder.
about the temperature, but certainly we'll try
Go
and
numb.
see if we can raise the volume and get a bit more clarity as well, please. Thank you. Yes, Assembly Member Hall, you're the next to ask.
Thank you. Happy to shout at you, Mr. Mayor, if it helps.
No difference
Always.
there then.
How will we know the difference, Susan?
Mr. Mayor, can you just clarify? I'm seeing through on social media that you've announced what's happening on Sky. Can you just confirm that's not the case, or is it the case that you're confirming the COVID situation?
I've done no media today, Chair. I've been busy talking to government ministers and London leaders and health experts, and then coming to Mayor's question time.
Okay, all right. I'll take that and see what's going on in social media. Thanks very much.
Right, okay.
Chair, I'm slightly crestfallen that colleagues are watching Sky rather than watching me, but there you go.
Not in this chamber.
All right, look, let's, that's good. Let's now move on to the section on questions to the Mayor as they appear on our priority order paper. May I request, please, that the members mute their microphones when they are not speaking, and can I appeal to the members and the Mayor to be respectful to each other and also not to speak over each other, to ensure that you are clearly heard and understood by other members and equally by Londoners watching the webcast. The first question on the order paper is entitled Transport for London. It's question number 3509, Extraordinary Funding and Financing Agreement, in the name of Assembly Member Dr. Moore. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, the current funding agreement runs until the 17th of October. That's this Saturday. We continue to discuss the next emergency funding package with government. I appreciate you're keen to know what the new deal will look like, but this is a live negotiation, so there's a limit to what I can say publicly at this stage. TfL asked for financial support for the next 18 months. It is clear that passenger numbers are not going to return to pre-pandemic levels anytime soon. And with a funding model which is so heavily reliant on fares income, COVID-19 has left TfL dangerously exposed. Back in May, I said the funding deal was a sticking plaster. I appreciate that there are competing demands and difficult choices to be made in all of this, and the great time pressure. But I fear we're yet again on course for another short-term make, do and mend fix, while the privately owned train operating companies have been given an 18-month bailout, which still allows them to make a profit. Let me put it plainly, TfL cannot invest in London's future when we don't know where the next pound is coming from. And I'll also remind colleagues and those watching from government, London contributes net more than £38 billion to the country's economy. TfL, as a huge investor in supply chains across the country, this matters also to the UK, what happens to TfL. The London Underground Investment Programme, for example, directly supports 43,000 jobs, 68% of which are outside London. Londoners and London businesses recognise the importance of TfL to London's success and the nation's success. A drip-feed approach to funding might suit the government, but it would be catastrophic for London and our country. If TfL doesn't know how much income it's going to be getting in a year or 18 months, how can it deliver the balanced budget it is legally required to produce? TfL has already applied tight spending controls across the board, including pausing entry into any new contracts, but continually deferring things is a false economy. You end up paying more in the long term. I have to be candid. If TfL doesn't get appropriate funding, they will be unable to run safe, reliable and frequent transport services. And any deal cannot seek to punish Londoners for doing what has been asked of them by the government, staying at home and away from public transport. I've always fought for the right and fair deal for London, and I'll continue to do so in the coming hours and days.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given we're within 2 days of the 17th of October deadline and on the brink of going into, it would appear, Tier 2 arrangements across London, and with business leaders across London calling for the government to provide a sustainable funding deal going forward, it's very frustrating for everyone. At the 1st of October Budget Committee meeting, Andy Byford said that 2/3 of the KPMG review of TfL's future financial position and future financial structure had been redacted. Has the government explained how they think TfL can discuss a future funding package when the government's thinking remains secret?
No, they've not explained that. I'm not sure how much that report cost, but it was paid for by taxpayers' money. Not only can I not see it, or Londoners not see it, but TfL's commissioner can't see it. Frankly, it's breathtaking.
Has an unredacted copy of the review been provided to TfL now? And will that unredacted copy be published along with the new funding agreement?
No, we haven't seen an unredacted copy, neither the commissioner, his top team, or the TfL Finance Committee. I'd be astonished if the government still sought to keep it a secret. I think they need to make it available to the TfL's team, and in due course it should be made public.
Transparency is clearly an issue for us on this, and it must be frustrating for everybody involved. I mean, it took 14 days between the May funding package being agreed and the DfT giving TfL permission to publish a copy of the agreement. Have you sought permission to publish this next agreement as soon as it is agreed? And could you tell me whether that permission has been granted?
It's a really good question, Dr. Moore. So TfL's Finance Committee meets tomorrow. Now, for the reasons you've alluded to in your question and your follow-up, you'll be aware October the 17th is when the deal comes to an end. It's important for the Finance Committee to have sight of the correspondence between me and the Secretary of State, which I'm sure they'll want to do for tomorrow. And I'll be speaking later on today with the Transport Commissioner and my Deputy for Transport about what information is made available to the Finance Committee. As you suggest, they should have sight of those documents, and as and when agreement is reached with the government, I'd expect that to be made public as well.
Yeah, it does feel like they're negotiating with one hand tied behind their back. Finally, from me, you understandably have complained about several of the conditions attached to the original funding package, most notably the suspension of free travel for under-18s. Can you confirm what conditions you are trying to remove from the new agreement and whether you've had any success in doing that?
Well, it's worth reminding you and reminding colleagues and, more importantly, Londoners, that last time, it was a couple of days before the deadline, that the government introduced these conditions for the first time. We were ready to begin negotiations on the second half of the year in early August. The government only began talking to us in earnest over the last few days. If past evidence is anything to go by, we can't not expect or be too surprised if the government tries to impose new conditions between now and deadline. Clearly, if they're detrimental to TfL or to Londoners, we will resist those. And I've also been, in the discussions, raising some of the conditions attached in the first half, because you'll appreciate some of them don't make economic sense, but also are extremely hard on some of the most vulnerable Londoners. And so if the government wants to pursue those conditions, extend them, or introduce new ones, it's for them to explain publicly the justification for doing so. And as I said earlier on, they gave funding for 18 months to privatised train operating companies without any conditions attached.
Yeah, it clearly is not a level playing field, this is a really difficult time for London, and it does not seem that the government are playing fair by Londoners. But thank you very much for your time, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member McCartney has a follow-up question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A fair funding deal for transport for London means jobs retained and created across the UK. And in your opening answer, you said that there are some 43,000 jobs in TfL supply chain. I understand 68% of them are outside of London. Can you just explain a little bit more what happens to those 43,000 UK-wide jobs if investment is not forthcoming?
It's a really important question. So one of the things I've tried to get across to the government, who seem unaware of this, is being pro-London is being pro-the UK. We are the engine of the country, and I think the levelling up agenda, inverted commas, is being used as a proxy to be anti-London. And I think what the government needs to realise is if London fails, the country fails. As TfL fails, our businesses in London fail. You'll have seen the letter from businesses across the country today. That was reported in one of the newspapers earlier on this week. I'll just give you one example. Many of the bus manufacturers are based outside of London, from Falkirk to Belfast, from Guildford to other parts of the country. If we can't agree contracts with the bus operators, the companies, that could lead to job losses elsewhere in the country. And we need to make sure that we're a going concern and are good for the money when it comes to these contracts. I'll give you another example. The Prime Minister visited not too long ago a factory in Goole that is making the new Piccadilly line trains, and I can go on. The taxis in East Midlands, the bicycles in West Midlands, and so forth. So the government's got to realise that by them playing political games with the Labour Mayor of London, they're putting at risk not just businesses and jobs in London, but businesses and jobs around the country. And my message to the government is, stop playing games, let's get around the table as grown-ups and do a deal as soon as possible.
Thank you for that. I think that's very clear. Can I just ask you, though, that has TfL actually to date had to stop the signing of new supply contracts?
No, we haven't. But one of the things, Chair, that I'm concerned about is to make sure that we can continue to honour the contracts we have, but also that the market, contractors and subcontractors have confidence in TfL. And I'm sure that's one of the things that will be discussed at the TfL Finance Committee, which meets tomorrow.
Thank you. I wonder, Mr. Mayor, whether members of Parliament of all political parties are exactly aware of the number of jobs in their constituencies dependent on TfL supply chain. But thank you for that.
Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. I want to slightly change the tone on this, and this is a completely non-political question, sir. With 10 weeks to go before Christmas, I wanted to ask you to really consider, and I've given your office notice of this question, consider a special Christmas present for the West End where 1 in 10 London jobs come from. Will you please consider the 4 Saturdays before Christmas, including Boxing Day, actually suspending the congestion charge on those 4 days, it will really help save jobs in the West End, business believe, and particularly Londoners, young Londoners' jobs as well, Mr. Mayor. So will you please consider that?
So the condition to both raise the amount of congestion charge to £15 and to extend it to 10 p.m. Every day of the week, including Saturday and Sunday, was something that the government imposed on TfL. Without giving a running commentary on the negotiations, I've been saying to the government that I'm aware from my conversation with businesses in the West End how detrimental that has been, particularly at weekends, for businesses in the West End. And that's one of the things I'm asking the government to reconsider, because you're absolutely right. These conditions imposed by the government are causing huge damage to businesses across our city. And I'm keen to do what I can, particularly as we enter level 2, to support our businesses. And I would hope the government would remove some of these conditions and shackles from us so we can be in charge of our own destiny.
Well, we could argue over the details of politics, sir, but I don't want to on this question. I just want, you have the power, do you not, to suspend the congestion charge for those 4 Saturdays if you wish to, sir?
No. If I breach the conditions the government's placed on TfL for the giving of the grant and the loan, they could quite easily not give us any further sums of money. That's why it's really important during the negotiation phase we're in with the government for you to support me in saying to the government no to these conditions and strings, because you're causing huge damage to London businesses. Allow the mayor and his experts at TfL to decide what should happen to the congestion charge, because they understand London's businesses far better than members of the cabinet or civil servants in Whitehall.
To put on the record, Mr. Mayor, you are saying you do not have the power, as the Mayor of London, to suspend that congestion zone for a Saturday.
I'm saying quite clearly, and I'll say it again, that the conditions that the government's imposed upon TfL in the issue of the grant and the loan means if I fail to abide by those conditions, the government is able to remove the grant and the loan terms, which could mean TfL not being able to make ends meet. And the only way we could then spend within our limits is to reduce services.
I believe that is correct, sir, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I request members, when they ask follow-up questions, that they relate to the main question rather than bringing in another matter? It doesn't quite help. The Mayor was happy to answer the question, but I think if we can stick to the subject matter with each of the questions, when there are follow-up questions, I think that will be extremely helpful. Thank you.
Just so you're aware, Chair, I did advise the Office of the Mayor of the question in advance, and it does relate to TfL finances, but I respect your decision, sir.
Thank you very much. Right, next question, 3705, is from Assembly Member O'Connell. It's regarding police officer safety.
Can I thank the Assembly Member for his question, and I know he's concerned about this for a number of years. The death of Sergeant Matt Ratana is an absolute tragedy. My heart goes out to the family and loved ones of this brave officer who has paid the ultimate price for helping to keep Londoners safe. I know from my visit to Croydon last week the impact this has had on his fellow officers, friends and the entire Met Police family. They mourn their colleague deeply at this extremely difficult time. Both the Met Police and the Independent Office for Police Conduct are conducting live independent investigations into this incident, and we must follow them to complete, bigger pardon, Chair, we must allow them to complete their inquiries. Tragic incidents like this are terrible reminders of the dangers our police officers face every single day to protect our city. Our officers work tirelessly to keep us safe, and we in turn should keep them safe. It's appalling that we've seen a 16% rise in attacks on our officers in London. Assaults on our police officers will not be tolerated, and anyone who commits this type of crime will feel the full force of the law. That's why I've called on the government for a further uplift to the assault on emergency workers legislation from a maximum of 12 months to 2 years, reflecting the seriousness with which assaults on emergency workers should be viewed. The Commissioner asked for funding to increase the provision of tasers, and we've invested an additional £1 million to this. We've all seen the biggest ever rollout of body-worn video, ensuring that when officers are attacked, evidence is captured to help bring their attackers to justice. And following the shocking murder of Sergeant Ratana, the Commissioner took swift action to protect officers while investigations are ongoing. She reissued all safety guidance. She introduced a new requirement for officers to wear a stab vest throughout the custody process, and she initiated a further rollout of search wands in vehicles that will carry people to check for concealed weapons before transporting. Assistant Commissioner Lawrence Taylor is conducting an MPS custody safety review, and the MPS is fully engaged with the National Police Chief's review of officer and staff safety and will ensure that improvements are made where appropriate. Operation Hampshire continues to establish a clear picture of assaults and is supporting those assaulted on duty and working to prosecute offenders. So far this year, there have been nearly 4,000 sanctioned detections for assaults on police officers. Our officers and staff come to work every day to protect the public, minimise harm, prevent crime and bring offenders to justice, and will continue, Chair, to ensure our officers and staff are provided with the best quality training and equipment, and that those who do attack our officers are prosecuted.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I thank you and others for your support and condolences at the loss of Sergeant Ratana. Our officers risk their lives daily to protect us, and we must do all we can to protect them. This was a question that I was going to pose at the last Mayor's question time, but it ran out of time, and it's taken a tragic turn since then with the incident, and I thank you for your response. Excuse me. I understand it's an ongoing investigation, and that is absolutely right. But I think you did also mention that there was going to be a review of officer safety run by the Met in custody suites. So they were going to review actually processes because something clearly went wrong with process. Have you any update on that particular aspect, Mr. Mayor?
Well, Chair, can I check? It's really important for me to say this for those watching, but since I've been Mayor, Senator O'Connell has been assiduous in raising this issue, and it's a good example of cross-party working together, challenging me to make sure we do what we can to keep our officers safe. And can I thank him on behalf of officers, their families and Londoners for continuing to do so. I can say, Senator O'Connell, that what the Met Police are not doing is waiting for the end of the process to make any changes. So they're making any changes in real time. And I mentioned the Lawrence Taylor review. I also mentioned in my answer the issue of the wands and so forth in custody suites. I can also give you the good news that the Croydon Custody Centre has now reopened. I was there in the day before. It was very moving and quite emotional, and you'll be really proud that officers were back and civilian staff were back ready for the reopening, even though many of them, and I say this not in any way to amplify the grief they're going through, but quite traumatised. Good example of their professionalism, but can I reassure you that the Commissioner, her deputy and her top team are making sure that in real time any improvements are made that need making.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the process aspect, I know there will be an investigation, but lifetime adjustments. But we will need to understand the process from the beginning of the interaction with the individual on the Croydon streets to how that was managed. But we will look forward to those. Your comments around the increased number of assaults on officers, these have gone up immensely. 1819 in the Met, 3,400, just under, were assaulted. And the NPCC has just published a report about protections UK-wide for officers. Have you had the opportunity, or your leading officers had the opportunity to look at that report and liaise with the Met around its conclusions?
We have, Chair, and my Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden has been working closely on this, and can I also just use the opportunity to put on record my thanks to the Police Federation. I meet Ken Marsh regularly and speak to him, as does Sophie Linden. And so we are following that through, and can also reassure you that the London Ambulance Service and other blue light services are using Operation Hampshire as a template to improve the protection of their frontline staff as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As I say, we will continue to look at the issue of officer safety to make sure that we protect those that protect us. And I would add your comments around the pride in our officers in Croydon. I attended on the couple of days after with other political leaders and spoke to the borough commander, and the pride of our officers under great stress and upset returning to their duties to keep Croydon safe is absolutely wonderful. And I thank you again for your interest and support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next question is from Assembly Member Russell, and that is about safeguarding the interests of disabled people.
Thank you, Chair. Our bold streets-based plans are transforming London streets, providing space to enable social distancing and preserving precious capacity on public transport for those less able to walk or cycle. Working with the boroughs, so far we have finished or are building almost 80 kilometres of new cycle lanes, creating over 22,000 square metres of new space for pedestrians, and put in place 75 low-traffic neighbourhoods and implemented more than 214 school streets so far. And as part of an ongoing trial, TfL extended the hours of over 270 bus lanes on London's red routes so they operate at all times. But any changes to our streets cannot adversely impact vulnerable groups, and I'm committed to ensuring that the interests of disabled people are safeguarded. TfL carries out equality impact assessments on every scheme it leads on. Over 60 street-based assessments are currently in progress, the results of which will be made available online. TfL also works closely with boroughs, reminding them of their public sector duties to ensure accessibility is embedded in all designs and decisions and in issuing guidance to support them. TfL is also engaging directly with organisations representing people with specific accessibility requirements. In addition to engagement with its independent disability advisory group, TfL hosted a series of working groups with representatives including Transport for All, Disability Rights UK, Inclusion London, Scope, and Royal Institute of Blind People to hear their views. All streets-based measures are temporary changes, and TfL and boroughs are listening to feedback and making changes where they're needed. On Cycleway 7, for example, where we've upgraded the provision for cyclists, changes have been made at several locations to create more space for emergency vehicles, and TfL is currently engaging with local charity Merton Vision on the design of bus stop bypasses in Colliers Ward. Our data shows that disabled people are more reliant on walking and using the bus than non-disabled people and are less likely to drive, which is why our streets-based programme is so important, helping disabled people to continue to get around London safely. This is especially important given the findings of the Rapid Evidence Review Commission that shows the disproportionate effect of COVID-19 on disabled people. TfL will continue to engage with stakeholders to ensure its work protects their needs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and that's very good to hear you recognise that many disabled people are dependent on walking and taking the bus. I'm worried that the debate about changing our streets has become very polarised, and people are claiming to speak for disabled people without thinking clearly about what helps people get around on an everyday basis. Now, I've been to visit schemes on the ground all over London, and I've met recently with Transport for All, Guide Dogs and Wheels for Wellbeing, and they've all raised good points about how street space can be more inclusive. So they tell me one problem for a lot of disabled Londoners is a lack of level pavements before or after street space. Too many street-based measures are using ramps and barriers as we would for roadworks, but these measures are now set to be lasting right through the winter for months and months ahead. So in Brixton and Camden, for example, you delivered fully accessible wider pavements at bus stops using rubber curbs and an asphalt infill, which is a temporary measure, but it's much more accessible. With physical distancing set to run through the winter, will you ensure that the pavements that are widened are fully accessible like the ones in Brixton and Camden?
Chair, I'm not citing of the details, but I'm more than happy to look at the suggestion that Senator Russell raises, and I can understand why she raises it. Can I take that away and come back to you?
Absolutely, thank you very much. I've also seen a few street-based schemes where tactile or blister paving, which enables visually impaired people to find a crossing, is in place. For example, on the Park Lane for the bus stop bypasses. So it can be done. So why isn't tactile paving being used on all street-based schemes, including the borough ones?
Well, firstly, I'm not excusing, I'm just explaining. I think it was the speed of getting them done in light of the deadlines set by the government. Again, not criticism of the government either. But again, if there are examples where we're not using the right equipment, the tactile stuff that's really important for visually impaired people, again, I'm really happy offline to speak to the Assembly Member Chair, because I think what we both want, what all of us want, is to make sure that everyone can take advantage, including those with disability issues. So again, more than happy to look into that.
That's great. Thank you very much. The groups that I've spoken with have raised specific concerns about equality impact assessments on street space schemes. So will you ensure that the equality impact assessments are, as Transport for All have asked, robust, meaningful and co-produced so that you can fully involve local disabled people in checking the impact of any schemes on their neighbouring streets?
Chair, I think we're in danger of being in agreement with everything.
Well, that's marvellous.
I'm not sure that's her street cred much good, but it makes perfect sense to me.
Okay, I'm almost out of time here, so I just want to say that these simple things like having very smooth pavements, dropped curves, tactile paving, they're absolutely crucial for disabled Londoners to get around safely. And there are new temporary measures can be accompanied with details, like a tapping rail to indicate where space is being used for tables and chairs to help visually impaired people get past safely. I'll write to you with more details on those ideas. But as we go into winter, and with this need to stay physically apart, these street space schemes need improving, not removing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chair, I'm really happy to work with this member. This is a really good example of ideas she has that we can action, which will improve life for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
There's a follow-up from Assembly Member Hall.
Sure.
Thank you. Well, I hope that we're in agreement, Mr. Mayor. That would be good, because one of the simplest changes that you could make to protect the interests of disabled people in street space schemes would be to ensure that wherever buses go, black cabs can go as well. And I was really reassured when Andy Byford told me at the Budget and Performance meeting that, and I'm going to quote, "I consider black cabs to be part of the public transport offer, and there is certainly no intention to treat them in some inferior way or degrade them in terms of a mode." And that where we are, for example, have been introducing 24-hour bus lanes, the taxis can go along the bus lanes. So are you willing to look at this very closely in all aspects, given the obvious advantages for disabled people, as they're the ones that very often need the black cabs?
It's an important point that the Assembly member raises about our black taxis being fully accessible to disabled Londoners. A really important point, and I'm pleased you mentioned, the Assembly member mentioned the pilot of the 24-hour bus lanes, and black taxis are allowed in those bus lanes, and it's really important that the pilot pans out and we see if it's a success. I'm hoping it is.
Thank you.
Right, move to next question from Assembly Member Curtin, which is on London demonstrations.
Thank you, Chair. Morning. The right to peaceful protest is a vital part of an open and democratic society, and I've always been clear about my support for peaceful and lawful protests. The Met Police has operational independence on how it polices protests, and I have confidence in the Commissioner and her team. London has one of the most experienced police forces in the world at dealing with public events and disorder. I know that the Commissioner has worked very hard to make sure people are still able to peacefully and lawfully protest, whilst remaining mindful of the potential impact this has on the spread of coronavirus. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the police who have been working tirelessly throughout this pandemic under extremely difficult circumstances to prevent disorder and to keep us safe. Managing protests has been particularly challenging during this period, with the rules around gatherings changing repeatedly. Since 20th of August, national legislation changes have meant that gatherings of more than 30 people have been banned. Some gatherings are exempt from this, but the organisers must carry out a risk assessment and make sure that all reasonable measures to limit the transmission of the virus are taken. The police plan for and respond to each protest based on the intelligence available and the specific situation they face, taking into account the latest rules. Each protest or demonstration is reviewed on its own merits. There is no one-size-fits-all response to public order. Highly trained public order commanders make up the gold, silver and bronze command structure of any public event. Prior to the event, Gold Command sets the strategy for the policing style that will be used based on the intelligence available to them. On the day, this structure is supported by the Special Operations Room, otherwise known as the Lambeth Room. This is the central hub at which all pre-planned and spontaneous events are managed and coordinated. Fast-paced operational decisions are made by Silver Command on the ground, taking into account the impact their decisions will have across the capital. Their decisions are supported by Bronze Command, who usually have geographical responsibility of the area within which the event is taking place. Debriefs take place with the command teams and partners as standard to review where improvements can be made.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning. Now, you mentioned there's been a lot of demonstrations over the last few months, and there certainly have been. I've been at many of them. I was at the 3 different freedom rallies which took place in Trafalgar Square on the 26th of August, 19th of September, 26th of September. and I spoke at one of them on the 19th of September. But I was quite shocked, particularly by the behaviour of the TSG riot police on the 26th of September, because the demonstration was absolutely, completely peaceful, unlike some of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations where police were attacked, a woman was thrown off her horse, flares were lit, and the flag at the cenotaph was burned. That happened at the BLM demonstrations. But on the 26th of September, columns of riot police waded into the crowds, batons drawn, people were injured, people's faces were bloodied, a woman was pushed off her chair. That, to me, is unacceptable behaviour from that unit of the Metropolitan Police. Who gave the order for that to happen?
Chair, I mean, I'm not sure if, I just don't know enough about the facts. I'm not sure if I can accept the premise of the facts set up by the member.
Would you accept would you accept that that's acceptable behaviour by that unit of the Metropolitan Police?
Well, Chair, I hope I said it I gave quite a full answer explaining how operationally these things work with gold, silver and bronze, and the experience of individual commanders. But if the member has particular issues or a complaint to make about police conduct on that day, I suggest he takes them up with both the MPS and the PC, which is the appropriate thing to do rather than this forum. I'm not abreast of the facts, and I can't, determine.
Well, what I can ask you about is your tweets, because on the 26th of September you tweeted, "This is not acceptable. I urge all protesters to leave now. Large gatherings are banned for a reason. You are putting the safety of our city at risk." That was you. Whereas on the Black Lives Matter demonstration, you put out a statement saying, "I stand with you and I share your anger and your pain." Now, they're completely different messages you put out about the Black Lives Matter one, which actually, there was a lot of violence. You seemed to support it, but the other one, the entirely peaceful demonstration at the Freedom Rally, you said it's not acceptable. So why did you put out the different statements there?
Well, I think, Chair, the member's in danger of not telling the entire picture, which is since the 20th of August, which is the post the BLM demonstration has been talked about, national legislation has changed, which has meant gatherings of more than 30 people have been banned, save for specific circumstances. And he also omits to mention that on the 26th of September, 9 police officers were injured at that demonstration. So it's really important to tell the complete picture rather than cherry-picking some of them. Sorry,
Mr. Mayor. I mean, those 9 police officers wouldn't have been injured if they hadn't have waded into the crowd. But you mentioned the 20th of August. Let's look at last week, because last weekend there was a demonstration of, a rally of 3,000 Shia Muslims gathered in Marble Arch for Ashura and marched up Edgware Road. And then on Sunday, the next day, there was another gathering where, again, a large crowd of Shia Muslims gathered at Marble Arch for Arba'in and marched down Park Lane. So are you saying then, on the basis of what you've just said, large gatherings shouldn't be allowed? Why were those demonstrations allowed, and why did you not say anything about those, whereas you did say something about the 26th of September Freedom Rally?
I've not got those facts with me, Chair. I'm happy to take them away and get a response sent to the member offline.
Fine. I think you should be consistent, Mr. Mayor, if you're putting out the message there. But there is one thing that is very disturbing, actually, also about the 26th of September, which was later on in the day. A very, very well-respected German doctor, Dr. Heiko Schöning, who is the chair of the World Doctors Alliance, was arrested in Speaker's Corner just for speaking truth about coronavirus. Might not agree with you, but certainly I would agree with what he says. Why was he arrested and he was held for 22 hours without charge by the police for speaking at Speaker's Corner? Do you agree with that, Mr. Mayor?
I mean, Chair, we're in danger of becoming ridiculous, me being asked about individual cases. I mean, the Met Police deals with more than 2,000 protests or demos a year. I think in 2018, 2,479, in 2019, 2,491. Up to now, we've got more than 1,500. But if there's any particular cases for which the member's concerned, rather than raising them at Mayor's question time, I'm more than happy if he writes to me in advance or speaks to me or gives me notice, I'll get the facts and happy to debate them.
Yeah,
here
well,
or
Mr.
elsewhere.
Mayor, I don't think it's ridiculous at all, because you are the Mayor of London, you are the Police and Crime Commissioner for London. These are all things which have been cases that have had high recognition that a lot of people are concerned about. But I see that you are not able to give me any answers about that at the moment. So I think I'll have to end my questioning here and hope that you can explain those incidents to me in a letter. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next question, 3351, is from Assembly Member Cooper, and that is on economic support during COVID-19.
Chair, our capital faces both an ongoing health crisis, which we cannot afford to be complacent about, and an economic crisis, which could lead to major job losses unless further action is taken. Ministers need to wake up to the looming unemployment crisis, as businesses are faced with no choice but to cut jobs as they struggle to survive. Many are on the financial knife edge, facing a perfect storm of continued home working, a lack of confidence in the testing regime, the collapse of domestic and international tourism, and the potential for further restrictions. We must strike a balance in the measures we take, always led by the science. That's why, having seen evidence from around the country that the measure may be counterproductive, I've called for the government to review the 10 p.m. closure of hospitality businesses. What is currently on offer is not enough. The new job support scheme is far less generous than other countries, with the government paying only 22% of someone's usual wages. London is now at a serious tipping point in the spread of this virus, where we need to start preparing for additional restrictions. I have serious concerns that the government's new measures for employees who work for UK firms forced to shut by law won't be enough to save thousands of jobs in London's key retail, hospitality, leisure and cultural sectors. And it's essential the government puts proper financial support in place for all affected workers, businesses, local authorities and households, not just those in very high Tier 3 levels, as has been announced this week. I'll continue to advocate for a much bigger and more expansive job protection scheme, targeted grants and loans for the worst affected sectors and geographic areas, and an extension to the business rate holidays, which is due to end in March.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And before I go into my questions, unlike Assemblymember Hall, who appears to be watching Sky, I've had a message from one of my constituents who insisted that I told you look like a film star wearing your padded jacket under your other jacket.
Did they say which one, Chair?
And it wasn't your wife,
Make her a
Mr.
deputy mayor,
so
please.
she's not sending you private messages. Somebody thinks you look fabulous. So anyway, that's not what I wanted to ask you about. We know that the number of claimants is up by almost 300,000 people. That's 161%. Unemployment currently standing at 5.3% amongst Londoners. New figures this week. Furloughed staff in London is almost 720,000, which is 17% of all London employees. So I noted what you were saying about feeling that we need more targeted support. Are these figures ones that you think are going to be able to persuade the government to give that to Londoners? Because I think it's impossible, particularly if you're self-employed, if you're asked to cover, from the money that you've got coming in, just 20%. How can you feed your family and your children on 20% of your normal income? I don't understand how that works.
And what's remarkable is this government's got it wrong, both in terms of health and the economy. We have the largest number of excess deaths of any country in Europe and the deepest recession of any country in Europe. When I speak to counterparts in Germany and France and other European countries, the assistance their government is giving their businesses and workers is far better than ours. Last night, the French president, for example, announced the 9 p.m. curfew, but also announced a fully funded furlough scheme. And it's so important that when businesses are struggling, particularly in hospitality, culture, retail, leisure, tourism, those businesses are kept afloat on life support, if you like, with assistance from the government. It's far more effective in the medium to long term to do that than allow them to go bust and workers be made redundant than it is the alternative what the government's considering. And so I'll continue to lobby the government. Indeed, my meeting this morning, I was lobbying the government ministers about the importance of a decent financial package scheme. And I'm hoping the Chancellor, who was quite happy to be photographed smiling in food stalls in August, will spend some time working on a plan to support our businesses, workers, families who are really struggling?
I mean, Mr. Mayor, actually, I want to compliment the Chancellor because I think his first set of arrangements for furlough and self-employed individuals was actually quite helpful. But I think we're now in a situation where we really need targeted help for certain sectors. And your Deputy Mayor, Justine Simons, in terms of the cultural sector, is such an important sector, not just for London in terms of tourism and also our own enjoyment, but it also brings all those benefits to the rest of the country that you were just talking about in terms of TfL. Is there anything that can be done to get something that is similar to what they've implemented in France and other countries?
Well, the Chancellor you refer to, his new offer to self-employed Londoners, is to cover just 20% of average monthly profits. If he can also negotiate a 20% payment of rents, overheads, food bills, then it's worth talking about. But he needs to be doing what colleagues across Europe are doing. It's so important. And to give you an idea of the contribution made by culture, I know some members on the Conservative side criticise our investment in culture. It contributes more than £52 billion to our economy. 1 out of 6 jobs in our city are in culture. And this idea that they can retrain into cyber is not just offensive, but it shows doesn't understand the contribution made by culture to our economy. It's actually the fastest growing sector in our economy before this pandemic. And it's really important that governments give support to this really important sector. I'm particularly worried about freelancers and others who've had no assistance at all from the first wave of support from the Chancellor, who've had now 6 months of no support. And I'm really worried about their viability in relation to the bills they've got to pay and the jobs they used to do going forward. That's why it's really important the government actually fills the gaps in the previous plan, but also supports businesses as we enter the second wave.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Let's move on to a question from Assembly Member Bailey, which is about crime during lockdown. 3667.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Throughout this pandemic, the Met Police have continued to work day and night to keep our city safe under extremely difficult circumstances. During the lockdown, different patterns of crime emerged, which meant that the police used this time to target prolific offenders responsible for the most serious crimes. Our new violence suppression units, which we established with over 600 officers working at a local level, seized over 450 offensive weapons across London, including knives and firearms. The lockdown also highlighted the need to do more to protect vulnerable people subjected to domestic abuse. That's why I created a new £1.5 million emergency fund to provide victims of domestic abuse with safe accommodation and support to flee their homes. By the end of September, we'd helped over 300 individuals escape from abuse. While crime and violence fell during lockdown, much of this was due to the restrictions placed on people's lives. Unfortunately, as the MPS expected and predicted, crime has gone back to near pre-lockdown levels because the root causes of crime are not only very much still present, but have been exacerbated by the impact of COVID-19. The reality is that deep-seated issues like poverty, inequality and lack of opportunities for young people, which have been made far worse by the government's austerity of the past decade, are continuing to drive crime and violence in our city. That's why we'll continue with our relentless approach in London, being tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. Our dedicated violent crime task force is arresting violent offenders and taking weapons off the street. The Violence Reduction Unit is tackling the underlying causes of crime in London, and our Young Londoners Fund is providing young people with opportunities to get out of gangs and violence and into employment and training. But we also need the government to step up and take responsibility. I've written to the Home Secretary warning that her failure to support our police as well as local and regional government to meet the financial challenges caused by COVID-19 will jeopardise our ability to tackle violent crime at this crucial moment. The government announced a £60 million surge fund last week for the police and councils, but this falls far short of the spiralling costs faced by both the MPS and local government as a result of the pandemic. The truth is, unless the government takes urgent action, there will be yet more cuts to policing in London and across the UK at the worst possible time. Now is the time for investment in our police and preventative services, not more cuts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think just for a start, I think we should be clear about Assembly Member Hall. I think what she said was she was reading social media that said you had made an announcement on Sky, which you subsequently said you didn't. I think that's important to say. Thank you for your answer. during lockdown, the police used the time to redeploy some of its assets and clear some of the most dangerous criminals off London Street, which was a very good tactic. But which of these tactics were the most successful, and are any of them going to remain permanent?
So a lot of the tactics used by the police because of the, I don't want to say free time, because that does a disservice to the police, they do, but they had time to do the investigative work that they otherwise don't do because they're, metaphorically speaking, firefighting. A lot of work isn't directly frontline police officers, it's forensics works and the sort of conversation with the CPS that you can't do on a day-to-day basis. The additional police officers we've invested frees up more police officers to do more of this sort of stuff. The violence suppression units we found really effective. These are sort of hyper wards, not just hyper wards, localised areas where the police have used the time to calculate which parts of a ward in a borough, previous history tells us, has a large level of crimes. There could be robbery, which is linked with knife crime, and then the violence suppression units are targeting those areas. Could be after school. School children are often the victims of mugging, and so a lot of that's taking place, and you'll see if you go around London, more high visibility policing, particularly in those areas at those times where there can be high crimes. One other point, I should say, is you'll have noticed robbery went down in some parts of London during lockdown. For obvious reasons, people went around. Westminster saw a big reduction and continues to do so in robbery because there are fewer tourists, domestic and international. Again, it provides opportunities for other sorts of policing work. And so you'll be seeing across London different patterns emerging. Other boroughs may have more antisocial behaviour as more people are breaching the rules around lockdown. So different patterns across London, but you're right, they've used the time quite sensibly to be proactive around this area.
As you say, crime is rising now, it's coming back to pre-COVID levels. And this morning I spoke to a group of Somali mothers who were very concerned about knife crime in particular and the steep rise we've seen since lockdown as measures were eased. Is there anything in particular that you can do to help fight that particular type of crime?
Well, a lot of things we're doing are particularly towards that. So the work we're doing with the Young Londoners Fund, giving young people constructive things to do, the work we're doing in the Violence Reduction Unit, treating crime, particularly knife crime, as a public health issue. We had a very good meeting yesterday with a partnership reference group, including a presentation from an excellent group who've done work around therapeutic interventions around young people, families, those who work in the area. We're also, you'll be interested to know, speaking to colleagues around the country and around the world, actually during lockdown there was a reduction, but also around the world I'm afraid there was an increase, a spike if you like, after lockdown was lifted. So we're speaking to them as well, and you'll be particularly keen to report back to colleagues you spoke to the work around county lines, the rescue and respond work. We've done really good work, not just the NCA, National Crime Agency, but the MP is speaking to police forces around the country, particularly around young people who are vulnerable. The Rescue and Response team, £3 million originally from City Hall, an additional fund from me of £800,000, working with individuals involved in gangs, young men / boys, and young girls as well who get involved in county lines as well. And I'm really happy to, offline, let you know of some of the work we're doing there, which is really encouraging.
Okay, thank you. Just to take a slightly different tack here. We've seen a 29% increase in the number of TfL staff taking days off, citing mental health as a problem. And I don't know if you've seen, there's been a lot more attacks on TfL staff as well in this COVID period, and I think it's having some effect on their mental health. So I'm wondering, would you join me in calls for a covenant, for a mental health covenant for TfL staff, in much the same way we have one for the police and for the armed forces?
Yeah, the best thing you can do if you really care about TfL staff is not criticise the work their trade unions do, making the very points that you claim to be making over the last few days. One of the reasons why people join a trade union is because a trade union can represent the concerns they've got. And what the trade unions do, if they have access to the mayor, as this mayor does, and like the previous mayor, is can listen to the concerns they raise on behalf of their members. And it's because this mayor engages with very good trade unions to represent their workers, we're having a rollout of body-worn videos to our workers on TfL to make sure you can capture any example of abuse of a member of staff, but also that evidence can be used in a prosecution undertaken by not just the MPS, but British Transport Police as well, with the help of TfL. And the other really good thing we can do, because we engage with trade unions, is understand the concerns TfL staff has. That involves issues around bus driver fatigue, but also listen to their concerns around COVID. Some of the measures we brought in London was because we engaged with the trade unions around, for example, stopping the front door entry of our buses, really, really important because we lost 29 bus drivers during this awful virus in phase one. but also some of the improvements we've seen around the enhanced cleaning regime across TfL. Another big thing we're doing, because we work with the trade unions, is working with staff around mental ill health. The previous commissioner, I'm sure the new commissioner will do so as well, is trained in first aid mental health, as indeed I am, but also we've made sure we've got mental first aid trainers and assistants to make sure that any staff who suffers mental ill health has the assistance. And one of the reasons why I talked about my own mental ill health, although I've been criticised for doing so by some members in this assembly, is to give people confidence to talk about mental ill health and to avoid the stigma. And it's really important we do that.
I'm sure the work of the trade unions is very good around this. It's their job to do so. But I'm asking you about, will you do something about it? Will you make it something that TfL have a covenant around to increase TfL's awareness of these things, to make sure things happen? The work of the trade unions is a separate situation, and that's great. But what are you going to do? Will you do it, yes or no?
Well, I'm sure the chair would rule you out of order if you were asking a question that goes beyond the remit of a question on crime. But as far as mental ill health is concerned of our TfL staff, it's quite clear to me that we need to continue to engage with trade unions. We need to continue to give those who work for the trade unions time to engage with us, and I'll continue to make sure I address any concerns raised by staff, either through the trade union or directly to me. The other thing we do really well is our regular surveys of staff. In fact, last year we had a better response from our staff than in previous years, and they raised the issue of concerns around the pressure they have. One of the reasons why I'm so grateful to them is TfL staff working with me have managed to reduce operating deficit of TfL by 86%. They've managed to work with me to reduce office accommodation, and they've managed to work with me to reduce back office and middle office staff as well. And it's really important to also put on record my thanks to them, because we've reduced strikes by more than 74% since I became mayor.
This question isn't about strikes, it's about the mental well-being of your staff at TfL. But that's enough from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I have indication from Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I just say, for the period that the previous question was asking for about the rise in crime, do you think those tactics that you did in the work of the borough violence suppression units made, even though crime has risen, any crime risen is going to be bad, made it less so in London than the rest of the country? I think England was much higher than where we were in London. Do you think those tactics contributed to that?
Without a doubt. It's really important to put on record my thanks to those members of the Assembly who've supported us in doing so, because you're right. What we've seen across the country, far bigger increases. We've not seen the sort of reductions we've seen in some areas. We've made big progress in London, and also big thanks to police, youth workers, families and others in communities who've done a huge amount.
And I think you were the first mayor to actually put it a major part of your police and crime strategy in terms of tackling violence across the piece and making sure that you gave your voice to that. I think it's the first time it's ever happened in any policing strategy since we've been established since 2000. Can I just say, in terms of that, police numbers come into it. Isn't it important that we continue to highlight that we should not be shortchanged by this government in terms of the extra investment in policing that they're allocating? Because what enabled us to do those tactics that you described earlier on was the extra policing which you had put in had come fed into the system. Now, of course, the government is giving us some, but they're not giving us our fair share of those resources. Do you not think we need to continually highlight that and expose government for their weakness in not giving fair share to Londoners in terms of we contribute for our taxes?
I think you raise a really important point on a number of levels. Number one, we don't receive the full allocation of national and international capital cities grant. We're shortchanged by about £180 million. Number two, the government announced 20,000 additional officers for the country. We should get 6,000 of those. We've only been given 1,300 so far. It's really important we get all 6,000 as soon as possible. Number three, some of the additional money we spend that we're promised by way of special grant, and when we spend it, we don't get. And so the Met Police suffers hugely as a consequence of that. Really important we get proper remuneration for that. But number four, I'm the mayor, unlike the previous mayor, who has increased the police precept to the maximum allowed to do so to pay for police officers. The previous mayor either froze the precept or cut it. So there was no police precept, which left us in a perilous state. The additional thousands of officers we have are thanks to contribution made by City Hall, and we mustn't allow some people to try and claim the credit for additional policies and resources thanks to a Labour mayor, but then criticise us when we lobby the government to do so, not help us to get more resources from the government.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Right, thank you. We now have our next question from Assembly Member McCartney, and that's on food insecurity during COVID-19 second wave. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. London's already high levels of food insecurity have risen during the pandemic, and I'm very concerned about further spikes in the coming months. That's why I've been working with central and local government and voluntary and community sector partners to do three things: monitor demand for food aid across London, ensure all local authorities have a food transition plan in place, and help central government partners to understand and unlock the resources local authorities and voluntary and community sector partners need to support Londoners in the months ahead. I'm particularly concerned that a number of government funding streams are coming to a close, just as food insecurity may be about to rise again. Local authorities' initial response to COVID-19 was based on the assumption that the costs incurred for some boroughs running up to £80,000 per week on food alone would be reimbursed. But this has not happened, and we can't assume local authorities will be able to respond in the same way without that guarantee. I'll continue to work with the London Transition Board and Strategic Coordination Group to ensure the focus on this issue is not lost. The government must also, Chair, now reimburse local authorities fully for the costs they've incurred to date and make funding available to support them and their VCS partners to meet the food needs of vulnerable Londoners in the months ahead. It should also be clear that food insecurity is a manifestation of poverty, and the tools to tackle this lie with the government. More needs to be done to ensure all Londoners who need it can not only access the food they need in the months ahead, but are supported to escape financial hardship.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And as you rightly say, food insecurity and poverty were rising before the pandemic hit. And what this pandemic has done is highlighted the precarious nature of many Londoners' finances. This week is London Challenge Poverty Week. And today the focus is on children. Now, you and me have campaigned for the extension of free school meal entitlements to cover school holidays, as have child property groups and individual food insecurity and poverty campaigners such as Marcus Rashford. But I'm quite tired having to do that every time a holiday is coming up. Do you agree with me that with the October half term coming up, that actually the government should just say they're going to allow those entitlements to be extended over all holidays while the pandemic is taking place? The Welsh Government have announced yesterday that they will do that up until next Easter.
Listen, can I just, as the mayor of this great city, pay tribute to Marcus Rashford, a Man United player, and it pains me to say so as a Liverpool fan, but he's been brilliant in relation to his campaigning. It was his campaigning that led to the U-turn from the government in relation to free school meals for children during these summer holidays. I am really concerned because this October half term for some children will be 2 weeks rather than one. That means if you receive free school meals in normal school term time, for 2 weeks potentially, you may go without a decent, hot, nourishing meal. And it's really important that the government therefore provides the support needed for those families to receive free school meals for their children during the half term. But also, let's not wait until December to start discussing the Christmas holidays. And let's not wait for Marcus Rashford to have a campaign. And so I think we need to lobby the government to say, look, half term is next week. Many families are now thinking about what they're going to do during the half term. They should do what the Welsh Government has done, and to say that during the half term, this entitlement that these children have, who are some of the most vulnerable, will continue during that half term.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the promise to lobby government on this issue. And I'd be also grateful if you could lobby them to perhaps extend free school meal provision to cover all those families perhaps that are in receipt of universal credit or other equivalent benefits, because as you said earlier, and as your letter to government clearly states today, it's those particular families who are in great financial precarious situation. But you mentioned also the fact that the government have not funded local authorities for the work they did during the first wave of COVID, and with the second wave now happening, what does the government need to do, not only to support local authorities, but also to the wonderful community and voluntary sector, which really stepped up over the last few months and have really delivered food in particular and support to the most vulnerable people in our communities.
Yes, a really important point you raised, and can I also echo your comments about the voluntary and community sector doing an amazing job in this area. Look, the point I'd make to the government is our councils in London are suffering a massive gap, a funding gap between the money they've spent in extra costs and the lost income. It's about £1.4 billion. Our councils, there's a gap. But similarly, many of our voluntary and community sectors haven't been able to do the fundraising they do because of COVID-19. The marathons run and the sponsorship there is there, the autumn fairs, the summer sales, the various events they do, they've not been able to do. So they're really struggling with the monies they normally have. And that's why it's really important the government steps in to support councils and community and voluntary groups. And also, I'd say to those supermarkets and food providers who are doing very well, they should think about whether they can also contribute towards food banks. Many food banks, as you know, rely upon the contributions of surplus shopping by ordinary people. Well, many families are now struggling to even feed their own families without doing this additional surplus shops to give to food banks. So we've got a perfect storm here where there's the greatest demand for food banks and help, but food banks and others have a real shortage of supplies. That's why it's so important the government steps in to support these vulnerable families.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your lobbying efforts. It is appreciated.
Deputy Chair, I'm asking the next question, so if you can kindly step in for that, please. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. London is facing an unemployment crisis, but one that could be averted by government action. I've written to the Chancellor to urge him to extend the furlough scheme for particular sectors, as his new job protection scheme will fail to prevent mass redundancy in otherwise viable businesses. I've also provided the government with a list of shovel-ready projects and investment opportunities that could kickstart growth and create jobs in London. At City Hall, we acted quickly to ensure unemployed Londoners affected by the pandemic are benefiting from the devolved adult education budget. After taking immediate steps to ensure the financial security of adult education providers, in May, I launched the £11 million COVID-19 response fund to help meet the training needs of key groups affected by the pandemic, including those made redundant as a result of COVID-19. From this academic year, we've also introduced new flexibilities to fund more pre-employment and job-focused training. And in August, well ahead of the government's lifetime skills announcement, I extended fully funded level 3 qualifications to all unemployed Londoners to help them retrain and find new employment opportunities. My Construction Academy and Digital Talent Programme, the London Enterprise Advisor Network and the Workforce Integration Network are also helping Londoners most in need to access opportunities and career support. The Employment Rights Hub is helping Londoners to understand their rights at work. I should say this, Deputy, unemployment and supporting Londoners into good work is also a key priority for the London Recovery Board. The board is currently developing action plans, including how we can expand access to skills training and good employment opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Young people are particularly hard hit during these very, very difficult times, with those aged 16 to 24 suffering the biggest drop in employment compared with other age groups. One of the 8 missions promoted by you, Mr. Mayor, and the Recovery Board is the New Deal for Young People. How will you make sure you help employ young people in the industries? London needs to build a better London and get back better, such as green jobs, digital jobs, jobs in creative industries, and jobs in local high streets.
Yeah, really important point you raised. First, I should say we're still lobbying the government to get devolution of 16 to 18-year-olds. We haven't got that yet. We've got 19 and above. The adult education monies we have, we are prioritising the areas you've talked about. Not just those who need reskilling who may have lost their jobs. Really important we get them back into work as soon as possible, but also future-proof jobs when the new normal begins. So a number of things we're doing, Chair. The Mayor's Construction Academy is doing lots of work in relation to supporting these young Londoners. We're making sure that they receive the right careers advice. So the London Enterprise Advisor Network are businesses who go in to give the right advice to young people, one of the worst things we can do is send people in the wrong direction, the jobs that aren't future-proof or helpful. And the final part of the equation is to make sure that we support businesses to be able to access the skilled young people, whether they're apprentices or working with adult colleges, to make sure there's a connection between the jobs that employers are creating and the skills they need, and the young people having the skills to do the jobs created by these employers in London.
Thank you. The rise in unemployment is not only impacting young people, what we discussed. In fact, between May and July, was 65s experienced the largest increase in the economic inactivity across UK. Some of these people may be choosing to retire, but others may be being forced out of jobs as well. How are you ensuring that you also provide targeted support to older Londoners looking for employment?
So you're right. The analysis shows that those who suffered the worst in the job market are younger Londoners and those above 50. And it's really important we help older Londoners as well. We can't, just focus on young Londoners, important though they are. So a number of things we're doing is we still have European Social Fund, something called the Sector Skills Programme, and we're investing £6 million of that money to give unemployed Londoners skills to progress in those industries that are doing well and where there's a demand. And we've also introduced adult education budget flexibility to allow unemployed learners who've achieved the first level 3 qualification to go further as well. And the other thing you'll be aware of, Chair, from a previous Mayor's Question Time, is we're giving free adult education to those who receive a minimum wage to get the skills to get a living wage and more as well. But you're right to remind me that we've got to also focus on older Londoners as well, particularly those above 50, those above 65. You'll be aware that the damage to retail has meant many older Londoners have lost their jobs, and so we're keen to make sure we get them skilled up for any jobs that are available in other sectors.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll go on to the question from Assembly Member Hall, and it's back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Deputy Chair, even. Thank you. I'm very proud of what we've already achieved in beginning to deliver the genuinely affordable homes that Londoners so desperately need. We've hit every one of our annual delivery targets, and last year we started the most new affordable homes in London since GDAIR records began in 2002, as the recent cross-party report from the Assembly Housing Committee recognised. That report also found that more affordable homes have been started in the first 4 years of this mayoral term than in either of the previous 2. The renewed emphasis I put on council housing delivery has been particularly effective, with 2019-2020 seeing the most new council home starts since 1983. As well as delivering more genuinely affordable housing, bringing councils back as a major player in house building also helps diversify the sector, making it more resilient to the ups and downs of the market. In delivering the current programme, we have, however, faced a number of challenges not of our own making, including Brexit, the urgent need for cladding remediation, and most recently the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the accompanying work restrictions and economic upheaval. At the outset of the pandemic, we acted quickly to convene a cross-sector housing delivery task force to identify how to keep on track with our ambitions to build homes of all tenures. The task force issued its report in July, calling for a government-funded recovery package to give affordable housing providers and private developers the support and confidence they need to keep building. The government has given a year's extension to the current Affordable Homes Programme to account for the impact of COVID-19, and my team has worked closely with providers to support their delivery work throughout this period. In particular, we've had some very positive discussions with councils about driving forward and even increasing their programmes over the next few years. As a result of all this work, I believe we're in the strongest position we could be, but hitting the targets will still be a real challenge given the circumstances. The outlook remains uncertain as COVID cases continue to rise, and protecting public health must, of course, come first. We will keep on working hard to try and hit our targets, keeping the Assembly updated in the usual ways.
Okay, thank you. You've been given a total of 4.82 billion from the government to start 116,000 affordable homes by, and you've said it, the extended deadline of March 23. Why has over £500 million of this funding not yet been allocated?
Well, we allocated the numbers of homes for the 116,000, and we're having discussions with housing associations and other developers in relation to challenges they have. But the allocations of the monies for the 116,000 have been done.
What makes you think you could spend any further money from the government if you've not even managed to spend all the money that you have?
Well, we have allocated the housing starts. You'll be aware of the needs there are in London, and so we're working with developers and others to make sure we can meet the target that we've agreed with the government. And as I said in my answer, we've met every target so far during this programme.
Well, of the 116,000 government-funded homes, you've still got 57,000 to start by March 23. How many of these homes do you expect to start each year? And will you start setting annual targets for each of these?
The targets are agreed with the government, and so there are targets with the government. I think on average we will be starting 19,000 homes during the course of the next couple of years because of the extension that the government has given us. By the way, the government also gave an extension to Homes England for homes outside London because it's an issue the entire country has. So the targets are agreed with MHCLG. What we published is over and above what Homes England published in the agreement they've got with MHCLG because we're trying to provide as much information as we can to colleagues.
Well, we were recently told in the Budget and Performance Committee by your Assistant Director of Housing that at least 10,000 homes could be started this year. So will you commit to this as a minimum?
Well, I think the reason why I gave you that figure was because of the negotiations we have. So it's 19,000 we think over the course of the next 2 years because of the government extension. And according to conversations we've had with housing providers and those who build the homes, we think we could start 10,300 in this financial year. That's the agreement we have with the providers.
And what will be the impact if you don't even deliver that number this year?
Well, they're a start, not the house is completed. Often during the course of the 6-year deal with the government, there may be ebbs and flows. So the key thing is the agreement with the government is for 116 affordable homes being started by March 2023, and we've agreed with the government yearly targets to get to 2023. So far we've exceeded all of those, and we'll continue to make sure that we do our best to exceed them again and break records in the course.
I just think it'd be a lot clearer for us all to hold you to account if you actually agreed specific numbers to be started, completed per year, so that we could hold you to account for what is and isn't being delivered.
I think that may be above your pay grab because it's what the Secretary of State for MHCLG agrees with us. But if you've got concerns with this, then you can raise it with MHCLG.
It's the transparency from you, Mr. Mayor, that I'm asking for.
Well,
I'll leave it at that, Chairman. Thank you.
You'll be aware, Senator Hall, that we publish far more than Homes England publish, even though they've got the same agreement with MHCLG. If there are any particular concerns the member has with the agreement we've got with MHCLG, then she can, of course, take it up with MHCLG if she's not happy with the response I've given.
I'm very often not happy with the responses you give, Mr. Mayor, but we have to put up with it, I'm afraid.
Such is life, I'm afraid, Chair. I'm always happy with the questions he asks.
I assume that's end of that communication. Can I ask Assembly Member Boff? He's got a follow-up question. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, now you've asked the government to review their policies in the light of the problems encountered by those in overcrowded accommodation during the pandemic. Will you now review yours?
We always keep our policies under review.
Mr. Mayor, you point-blank refused to review your housing strategy at previous meetings. Have you decided that perhaps you should now?
No. The fact that you're always reviewing your policy doesn't mean any individual strategy or plan should change. Once we've got finally from the government approval of the draft London plan so it can become a London plan, Other things may flow from that. But a lot of those things are contingent upon the government finally signing off the London plan. It's been with them since December now. Once we've got that agreed from the government, we can then look at what other things flow from that. There could be SPGs or other things to amend policies. And if the member is keen for us to change any particular strategy, he should try and persuade the government to sign off our London plan at last.
My job is to try to persuade you, Mr Mayor, as is the Assembly's, which has unanimously agreed that your housing policies need to be reviewed. But thank you.
Is that a question there?
I think it was a flourish.
Okay, let's move on to the next question, which is from Assembly Member Prince on Barkingside South LTN.
Thank you, Chair. The London Borough of Redbridge successfully bid for streets-based funding in June to deliver a number of low-traffic neighbourhoods, including Barkingside South and School Streets. This funding formed part of a package announced by the Secretary of State for Transport in May as an emergency response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The only money made available by the Department for Transport, DFT, for Transport for London, TfL, to share with local authorities was for the express purpose of supporting measures to enable more walking and cycling, including low-traffic neighbourhoods to ease pressure on public transport and prevent a spike in car use. The allocation of all funding was jointly agreed by TfL, City Hall, the DFT and Number 10. While the borough is ultimately responsible for the design and implementation of the scheme, as well as engagement, TfL has provided a range of support throughout the planning and implementation. TfL has developed guidance informed by the DFT for local authorities to plan, design and implement effective walking and cycling schemes. This is available on the TfL website. TfL provided specific technical support to Redbridge Council during the development of the Barkingside South scheme, including guidance on traffic implications for surrounding roads, impact on bus services in the area, and mapping the scheme onto emergency services and navigation systems. Following the scheme's introduction, TfL is monitoring bus journey times and traffic data and adjusting traffic signal timings. I'm aware that there are local concerns about this scheme, and it is right that the borough continues to engage with the local community to make sure any issues that have become apparent are considered and dealt with appropriately. But we mustn't lose sight of what is hoped to be achieved by introducing these types of schemes. By providing alternatives to car use for those who can walk or cycle, the streets-based programme seeks to prevent a damaging and unsustainable car-based recovery, which would increase congestion and road danger and negatively impact air quality and public health.
Assembly Member Prince, do you want to come back?
Frozen chair, still reading the brief. Oh, there he is.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Can I just? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Go
Thank you. Can I just start though, Mr. Mayor, by thanking you for the reintroduction of motorcycle training. As you're aware, there's been an increase in motorcycle deaths over the last figures, and I was wondering whether you would be able to help me and agree that I could organise a roundtable with the Deputy Mayor to discuss this issue around motorcycle deaths, bringing in experts like Motorcycle Action Group and so on, so that we can see what we can do about that.
Can I just say, Assembly Member Prince has been a really good champion for motorcycle safety, and some of the issues they have been brought to my attention. I'm more than happy, because he's always very collegiate and always has good ideas, to arrange for a meeting, a roundtable, as he suggested, with Deputy Mayor Heidi Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moving on to Barkingside South, thanks for the very full response. I mean, you probably are aware, Mr. Mayor, there's been a 4,000 person petition. Hundreds of people, you won't be aware, hundreds of people have contacted me. There's the Twitter campaign, hashtag Barkingside Chaos. I'm just wondering, Mr. Mayor, what you could do to help the people of Redbridge who are clearly opposed to this scheme. What could you do to help the people of Redbridge, Mr. Mayor?
Well, what I say, Chair, respectfully, is the Council is engaging and listening, as they are across London councils when they've got low traffic neighbourhoods. And he mentions those people who have signed a petition. The council will also take the views of those who haven't signed a petition, but who may have views, and it could be argued are in the silent majority. So the key thing, though, I'd say to the Assembly member is, I know he's done a good job engaging with the council and with residents to continue to do so. One of the things the government required councils to do was have these schemes up and ready to go very, very swiftly. That's led to some challenges across the city. Redbridge aren't alone in this. And he needs to continue doing what he's doing, which is to, work with residents, work with the council, work with businesses, work with the emergency services to get the best possible scheme in that part of London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But do you think it's right that there was little or no consultation with the blue light services, which has resulted in a number of delays for them attending emergency call-outs, and there does seem to be a need for urgent change to some of the scheme just to allow access for emergency services?
I mean, it's just worth reminding all of us that the schemes across London arose from an emergency traffic order and that the government introduced for good reasons, because the government was keen to avoid a cardiac recovery, but to deal with the pandemic and to allow social distancing being kept and the rest of it. And so my understanding is that the councils have been speaking regularly with the blue light services. They will continue to do so. Any changes that need to be made because of concerns raised by the blue light services are made by councils across London. I've seen for myself them doing so, and indeed by TfL on some of their schemes. But if he's aware of any particular issues in Redbridge that are causing the emergency services problems, please, if he's not had any success with the council or anybody else, let us know, and we can make sure we raise any concerns from the emergency services with the council and make any changes that are required to be made.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. That's really helpful. Thank you.
I have two follow-up questions, Mr. Mayor. One is from Assembly Member Devonish, and another is from Assembly Member Bailey, in that order. Assembly Member Devonish.
Mr. Mayor, isn't the issue really about public consultation? And you'll be aware that during COVID, public consultation has got much better across London boroughs with online forms of communication on planning, for example. So all we really need to do on transport, so we don't become such a political hot potato, is have more public consultation. So will you make sure that TfL now do start public consultation for all of the emergency schemes that have gone in during COVID?
There's a basic ignorance about these schemes, which is worth just educating Tory members about. These are council schemes. These are council schemes. Now, if he's being critical of Kensington and Chelsea and Westminster, but he's scared to say so, then he should just say that.
TfL are very much involved in most, if not all, of these schemes, Mr. Mayor, and it's the point about public consultation. Can you support the boroughs, if you're saying it's the boroughs, can you support them in terms of improving public consultation? Because the issue isn't an issue, we don't want to argue about this, we just want to let the Londoners actually have a choice in how these are implemented. They're not having their say quite often.
Well, the problem, Chair, is he's in danger of misleading Londoners by what he's reading out. And I'm sorry he did...
You should know.
I'm sorry he did Keith Prince a discourtesy by not listening to the answer I gave him, which answered this question. These are council schemes which we help administer for the DFT. And one of the things that the government requires or for these schemes to be in place very quickly from the councils, or they will be unsuccessful in securing the money and getting the schemes off the ground. I accept, though, that because the councils were required to get the schemes off the ground very quickly, often there's not been a chance to have proper public consultation. That's why the good councils, and I don't include KNC or Westminster in this, or Wandsworth, have been listening, engaging, and working with residents and emergency services to ameliorate any problems and to improve the schemes.
Sorry he took a very partisan view, Chair, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Assembly Member Bailey.
Mr. Mayor, you say these are council schemes and they're being supported by TfL, and that's correct, I'm sure. But in the Redbridge case in particular, there's some real safety concerns. And I'm wondering if you can prompt TfL then to support the council more, because the council are not listening to local residents. The very particular safety concern I'm talking about is the signage. Much of the signage for the LTNs is incorrect. And in one example in particular, there's no signage, so cars are turning off of the A12, being confronted with a barrier and then having to back onto the A12, which is of course highly dangerous. And I wonder if you can get TfL to have a look at that, because the residents haven't been able to get the council to do anything about it.
Well, Chair, you'll appreciate that I'm not fully sighted of an issue with the A12, but if the member wants to email my office, I'm more than happy to look at particular concerns, particularly their safety concerns.
I think that's a good way forward. Yep. Thank you. Agree to that? Thank you. Okay, I've got further intervention from Assembly Member Steve O'Connell, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I'll be brief on this, and I've listened to the debate. The issue in my neck of the woods is a cross-border consultation. I'm talking about the Crystal Palace area that actually is the conjunction of 5 boroughs, but the main effect, I believe, is the imposition of the OTNs, which in principle, with proper consultation, I have no objection to, and the effect on the adjoining borough of Bromley. So I would urge, and I've written to TfL, to urge your support that there is proper consultation, and indeed that consultation cuts across adjoining boroughs, because it does affect residents in their normal business running across both boroughs. Would you just accept and confirm that, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, and I know the area well, and he's right. It is literally 5 boroughs on that palace area, and there are unintended consequences in relation to what Borough A may do on other boroughs, and there are other examples across London as well. I'm more than happy if he wants me to look into any particular cases. Heidi Alexander's doing a good job trying to negotiate them, but he's absolutely right. There is an anomaly, I don't want to call it a loophole, which means that Borough B could often have adverse consequences because of very good policies in Borough A that are working for Borough A, but lead to displacement and other challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Right. Next question is from Assembly Member Pigeon on the Silvertown Tunnel.
Chair, before I get to Assembly Member Pigeon's question, can I, with your permission, make a short statement?
Yes, Assembly Member, we are facing very fast-moving situation. I believe there's been some announcement in House of Commons, and it's only appropriate and important that we allow Mr. Mayor to have a short statement on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for the interruption, Chair, but I've always very important for me to keep the Assembly updated with developments on an important issue. I've just received confirmation that the government has now confirmed and announced that London will be going into Tier 2, or the high alert level of restrictions. This means from midnight tomorrow, Londoners will not be allowed to meet socially with people they do not live with indoors. This includes private homes as well as pubs or restaurants. Londoners can meet friends and family outdoors, but only in a group of up to 6 people. People in support bubbles can go and meet in as before, and informal childcare may also be provided. As I have repeatedly said, nobody wants more restrictions, but these additional measures have been deemed necessary in order to save Londoners' lives by myself, London Council leaders and the government based on the latest expert scientific and public health advice. I know these further restrictions will require Londoners to make even more sacrifices, but I'm afraid we've been left with no other choice. The government has been working with us in this issue, but I'm afraid it's really important that I put on record that, in my view, the increase in the virus was not inevitable had the government not failed to get a working test, trace and isolate system in place. Moving London to Tier 2 will, we hope, help to slow the spread of the virus, take pressure off the NHS and help avert the possibility of a full lockdown lasting months, which should be the worst possible outcome for Londoners and our economy. So I'd urge all Londoners today to follow the new rules so that we can support our NHS, save lives and protect our economy. I understand, Chair, that the Secretary of State has made a statement in Parliament, and I thought it proper that the Assembly are notified as soon as I could.
Well, appreciate, Mr. Mayor, the announcement. Given the seriousness of the implications of the situation we find ourselves in, I'm happy for any follow-up questions within the sort of normal mayoral report arrangements that we have. If any member member wants to raise any question, but just a caution that the time will need to come out of the group time if you do want to raise any question. Otherwise, you're welcome to whatever issues you may have, pick that up with the Mayor after the Mayor's question time. No, I don't believe anyone wants to have any question immediately to the Mayor. So we resume the MQT as per the agenda. Yes, it is question from Assembly Member Pigeon on Silvertown Tunnel. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Investment in the Silvertown Tunnel will bring widespread benefits to London. By finally addressing the long-standing issues at the Blackwall Tunnel, it will massively reduce congestion in the area, improve air quality and support economic growth in East London. The construction cost of the project, anticipated to be around £1 billion, has been regularly published since 2014 and has not significantly changed in that time. The costs to Londoners of existing congestion at the Blackwall Tunnel are huge. TfL estimates more than 1 million hours are wasted each year in traffic queuing for the Blackwall Tunnel. The areas around the tunnel suffer from some of the worst air quality in London. The tunnel has had to close over 300 times this year alone, even with lockdown impacting traffic levels. This leads to traffic chaos, with miles of standing traffic emitting fumes across wide areas of South and East London. Doing nothing to address these options is not an option. TfL awarded a design, build, finance and maintain contract to the River Links Consortium at the end of 2019. Only once the tunnel has been built and is opened will TfL begin to make repayments to River Links. This means that TfL is not liable for additional payments or delays in the same way as more traditional construction contracts. River Links will be responsible for maintenance and the renewal of the vital systems and equipment for over 25 years. TfL currently anticipates repayments will amount to around £65 million in the first year, but the actual amount will vary depending on inflation and the performance of River Links. TfL anticipate that revenue received from user charging at the Blackwall and Silvertown tunnels will cover these payments and generate a surplus that will be reinvested in the transport network. River Links has no entitlement to this revenue or interest in the operation of the user charge, being to manage traffic and environmental impacts. Even as traffic has decreased dramatically on some roads in London during the COVID-19 pandemic, congestion has continued at the Blackwall Tunnel throughout, and traffic levels through the tunnel have already returned to pre-pandemic levels. This vital river crossing will reduce congestion, transform cross-river public transport connections, and improve some of the worst air quality anywhere in London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Less than a year ago, TfL issued a press release stating that the Silvertown Tunnel was a £1 billion project, and you've confirmed that today. But do you accept that, including all the annual payments up to 2050, that its real cost will actually be £2 billion?
No, because you're not comparing like with like. I know you like comparing like with like.
This is from a TfL Audit and Assurance Committee paper on the 11th of September, Mr. Mayor, just for reference. It's not a figure I've made up.
No, well, let's talk about the like for like. So when it comes to construction projects, you're including the cost of maintenance and the cost of finance. So when it comes, for example, to a comparable project, the cost of bank station capacity upgrade, we don't include in that construction costs the cost of the maintenance over the next 25 years, of the costs, or the cost of us borrowing the money to do so. And I think you're in danger of not comparing apples with apples.
Okay. Let's move on to another cost that I'd like to look at today. The financial package for the road tunnel relies on income from tolls, but the deal really relies on the tolls being buoyant. They can never be set at a level that would actively deter people from driving, and even long-distance commuting by car cannot be effectively challenged as the tolls need to pay for this huge bill. How do you square your support for the Silvertown Tunnel with your commitment to avoid a car-led recovery from COVID?
A number of reasons why. Firstly, you'll be aware from the answer I gave, which is we already have a car-led recovery in the tunnel. The numbers of people using Blackwall Tunnel hasn't gone down. The numbers of times it's been closed isn't going down, and the cost to both health in terms of air quality, the cost to businesses in terms of loss of productivity by congestion has been increasing. One of the things we managed to secure in relation to the Silvertown Tunnel was a lane reserved for buses. And you'll be aware our buses now, thanks to policies of this mayor, are fully ULEZ compliant, and we're getting more and more electric buses going forward. So we'll have in that reserved tunnel, reserve lane buses starting off at 24 buses an hour. But you'll also be aware currently public transport in that part of London is very haphazard and unreliable because the buses can't rely upon the tunnel. It's the one-decker, single-decker buses getting through the tunnel, which means people don't use the bus, instead drive. I'm also working on schemes to enable pedestrians to be able to cross from one side of the tunnel to the other without paying a fare, but also bicycles for cyclists to go from one part of the tunnel to the other without having to pay additional costs. So we've also undertaken an assessment of the impact of our policies on the new Silvertown Tunnel on the environment. Add to that the extension of ULEZ up to the north and south circular. This will be within the ULEZ area. The independent evidence we have is this will not make air quality worse, will not make congestion worse, but will in fact improve both those things.
Okay, well, I wanted to come on to the environmental cost. Obviously, there are issues where you build roads, and quite honestly, I don't think I've ever seen a road scheme that actually has led to a decrease in traffic. But on air monitoring, Mr. Mayor, I'm concerned that at present, the new monitoring stations appear to only cover nitrogen dioxide, but not harmful particulate matter. So I'm wondering, will you give a firm commitment today to guarantee extensive monitoring of all forms of harmful pollutants on both sides of the tunnel, Greenwich, Deptford, New Cross, Tower Hamlets and throughout Newham, to assess the true impact of your Silvertown Tunnel?
Yeah, my air quality team is considering options for further PM 2.5 monitoring in support of the work already underway. You'll be aware that the monitors at the moment don't do that, and that's some work we're exploring.
But that's something you would potentially commit to if it's possible? Yes, you're happy to commit to that if the equipment's available?
I commit to the answer I just gave, which is my air quality team is considering options for further PM 2.5 monitoring in support of the work already underway in relation to nitrogen dioxide.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Arnold, and that is on COVID-19 testing in education settings.
Thank you, Chair. From the very start of this pandemic, it has been absolutely clear that testing, contact tracing and self-isolation are the most important ways to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Without testing, we simply don't have a clear picture of who is carrying this awful disease. With cases continuing to increase across the capital, it's unbelievable that the government still not put in place adequate testing, something I've been pressing on them for some time. I know access to testing is causing real challenges for our schools, colleges, universities, students and parents, and that it's currently keeping too many children and staff away from the classroom. Over a period of just 6 days, one school reported 82 lost teaching days as staff waited for tests and results, and 360 lost learning days as children self-isolated or parents decided to keep their children at home due to anxiety about the spread of the virus. We're at a crucial moment with young people back at school and college and students having returned to university. That's why last month I wrote to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, stressing how vital it is that some testing capacity is ring-fenced specifically for nurseries, schools and colleges. I've yet to receive a response. The allocation to schools and colleges of 10 test kits per 1,000 students with a 21-day wait to reorder is simply not good enough. The government needs to act urgently so test centres across London prioritise all education staff, including those working in early years, college and university, with results available within 24 hours. My Deputy Mayor for Education and Childcare, Senator Member Joanne McCartney, has been working with representatives from schools, universities and local and central government to coordinate London's education response to the challenge of COVID-19. I understand how crucial it is that the capital schools, colleges and universities remain open. I'll continue to press through whichever channels are necessary for a testing system that will allow them to do so.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that full answer. Can I just take you back to the statement that you just made? Can you, do you have any information about what impact London being in Tier 2 will now have on the education establishments?
Yeah, so Tier 2, which is high alert level, won't affect directly education establishments. What it will have an impact on is the issue of household mixing when it comes to families or those in families, either inside the home or outside the home. And so we're hoping there's no adverse impact on that. One thing that I spoke to the Health Secretary about both yesterday and today was the issue of increased testing, which is really important and linked with your main question as well.
Yes, I mean, the frustration is that we just don't seem to be able to get any movement on such a common sense approach. So can I just ask you again, in Tier 2, we will have students, if you like, held in their faculties, in their universities. Who is going to be looking after their welfare? I know that there are universities provision, but is there an overview? Is somebody planning to look at the impact this is going to have on our students, especially those in universities?
Well, you'll be aware as a Londoner that we have hundreds of thousands of students from outside London at universities in London. I think the last figure I saw was 500,000. And I'm really worried about not just their physical health caused by COVID-19, but their mental ill health caused by COVID-19, the stress, the anxiety, the worry, and it's a real concern. They're away from their families, often for the first time, unfamiliar surroundings, with people they don't really know, and they could be being told to stay in their halls of residence or their home, also told they can't mix with others. I think there is an issue also, Senator Arnold, with people returning to home, inverted commas, from other parts of the country, potentially carrying this virus, and they could be asymptomatic. And that's why at the root of this is an effective testing system, and then contact tracing, and this...
Just finish by Mr. Mayor, just finishing by saying you will know and I know, but people forget that 25% of London's population are aged under 25, and they are so often overlooked. And so I know that you are as committed as I am and others are to ensuring their welfare. So please get somebody on this case and, you know, keep your foot on the pedal, because somebody has got to be speaking up for our young people. Otherwise, we're going to have a lost generation in London because of this blooming virus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question, 3774, has been withdrawn. So we will move on to question number 3578 from Assembly Member Dr. Sahota, which is about London's campaign to boost flu vaccination rates.
Thank you, Chair. With the risk of COVID-19 and flu both circulating this winter, this year's flu campaign is more important and larger than ever. Not only is it the best way to protect yourself and people around you, but it will also help protect the NHS, which is already under huge pressure. I'm doing all I can to promote the NHS's winter flu campaign through London. I get a flu jab due to my asthma, and I had this year's vaccine 2 weeks ago. I urge all Londoners who are eligible to have the vaccination. This year, the NHS has extended the eligibility for a funded vaccine to a wider range of individuals to protect more vulnerable people and to support the resilience of the NHS. The NHS aims to deliver the vaccination to approximately 13 million people, almost double last year's target. I've been working with partners to make sure this message gets to the right people. I've discussed the issue as part of my regular meetings with council leaders and public health officials, and this also remains a live conversation for the Strategic Coordination Group. I particularly want to make sure messages about the flu vaccine reach London's Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, as well as our more deprived communities who have been so disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and who are more likely to be at risk of flu due to underlying health conditions. I'm supporting London's boroughs to increase levels of flu vaccination, also amongst children and young people, through my Healthy Early Years and Healthy Schools programmes, as well as helping to ensure that preschool children are up to date with their routine immunisations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that question. The issue of transparency has been raised a number of times during this Mayor's question time. Of course, one of the things which is really missing in the debate is the minutes of the SAGE meeting on the 24th of September, which the government hasn't published for some reason, and I hope the government will now publish to ensure that all people living in this country are aware that we follow the scientific advice rather than any other source of advice. But one of the things they did publish, of course, was the co-infection or the co-relationship between flu vaccinations and COVID deaths.
and as you may know already, that 43% people who died had a co-infection of influenza and of COVID, rather than people who just had COVID on their own line. Only 27% died in that group. But so the question is, it's very important. What have we done across London, and what has the NHS done particularly to ensure that the rates of vaccination goes up in London? I know that you have been a good example, but what have the London NHS done about this?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, can I just underscore your point about the link between those who have respiratory conditions and the impact of COVID-19, particularly with flu as well. And so we're doing a huge amount, more so than ever before, Dr. Sota. And the other point to make is we're making sure that the messaging is culturally competent so it can reach London's diverse communities. One of the lessons we learned from the first wave was the disproportionate impacts on Black, Asian, minority ethnic Londoners, particularly those with underlying health conditions who are susceptible to a bad case of flu as well. And so we're hoping to reach double the numbers of Londoners we already do. And so NHS London has done a huge amount in relation to their workers, in relation to TfL, the MPS and others, particularly those with underlying health conditions. And many GPs I know are running mass vaccination programs because actually GPs often are the best route in to meet many Londoners. Any additional ideas you have, I know NHS London are in the ideas business. They don't pretend they've got all the answers, and so it's really important we reach as many people as we can, because that will mean if they catch the COVID virus and they've been vaccinated against catching the flu and they don't get it, they've got a better chance of coming through COVID-19.
The other thing, Mr. Mayor, of course, coming back on the issue which was raised by my colleague, Assembly Member Jet Arnold, was a question about universities. As you know, universities are autonomous institutions, and there's no legislation that has been implemented to control the virus nationally on university campuses. And we have 500,000 students in London. What can we do to make sure there's a coordinated approach of controlling viruses on universities? Is there a case for you to call the universities and the further education colleges together, make sure we have a consistent policy right across London?
Yeah, I've been really impressed with how the higher education institutions are working together and with us during this pandemic. So we have on the London Transition Board a piece of work where we work closely with the universities, and it's really important that Professor Kevin Fenton continues to have a good relationship with the universities, and Deborah Bull, who's on that relevant subgroup and on the Transition Board, leads on some of that work for us. But to reassure you, we are working with the universities across London. We were aware of this being an issue, and also I should put on the record my thanks for the universities who've offered up their laboratories to increase capacity when it comes to testing with MedCity as well. That's been really helpful.
Just finally, of course, Mr. Mayor, you know, we are now heading for Tier 2 tomorrow, but of course the government will have looked at some metrics to say why they've gone for this policy rather than a local lockdown, which was recommended by the SAGE meeting some weeks ago. Are you privy to those things, discussions, so that you can be preparing London for the right response? Or are you kept in the dark entirely on thinking of the reasoning behind the government's policies?
I've got to be honest. I saw the SAGE reports the same time as you did when they were made public, and I was shocked when I read them. They were 3 weeks old, and it's quite clear what the SAGE advice is. The most effective way to slow down the spread of the virus is by a national circuit breaker. And they also talked about those policies that would have a marginal impact. And I'm worried the government's making the wrong call yet again and being slow to respond. And so I continue to call on the government to have a national short-circuit breaker. In the absence of that, we in London are doing the prudent thing and going to alert level 2 from tomorrow night, and it's really important Londoners follow the rules.
I echo your comments, Mr. Mayor. I think we should all follow the advice of the government, but I wish the government was following the advice of SAGE rather than making their own mind up on this matter. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Boff, you have a follow-up on this?
Will you be restoring the flu jab campaign for TfL staff that was discontinued when you became mayor?
So TfL staff are encouraged to have the flu jab. I'm not sure about the particular campaign you referred to. I'm more than happy to look at it to see if that campaign needs to be reinstalled. But I think the measures we're taking already will lead to more people taking that up. But I'm more than happy to take that away because I can't, off the top of my head, remember it.
Will any such campaign include the free flu voucher scheme for frontline staff that was provided by your predecessor?
I'm not sighted of that, Chair. I'm happy to go away and look into that.
Can look at that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question on the order paper 3619 has been withdrawn. So we move on to a question from Assembly Member Duval, which is about Brexit negotiations and impact on London.
Yes, I absolutely agree. The EU Council meeting finishes tomorrow. If no trade deal is agreed by the end of this crunch summit, I understand there'll be all challenges for us going forward, and I urge the government to put the British people first and to seek an immediate extension to the transition period until we've managed to turn the tables on COVID-19. The pandemic has already triggered the most far-reaching public health and economic emergency since the Second World War, with more emotional heartache, economic suffering and job losses expected in the months ahead. At the worst possible moment and deeply irresponsible for the government to choose to inflict a further economic shock on our country by leaving the EU with no trade deal in place. Independent research shows that in London alone, this would mean 87,000 fewer jobs by 2030, and that's on top of the catastrophic impact of the pandemic on jobs and income. The looming failure to agree a deal for our services sector is especially worrying. You'll be aware London's world-leading finance, professional services, tech and creative industries account for over 2/5 of UK exports and services. Rather than wasting precious time and resources preparing for a Brexit cliff edge, the overriding priority for everyone in government must be to get this deadly virus under control and protecting jobs and livelihoods. This is not about whether people supported remaining in the EU or leaving. That debate is over. Brexit is happening. This is about doing the right thing for our country at a moment of acute national crisis.
It's just another promise broken by the Prime Minister for the oven ready deal. But in terms of the money that's been spent on the issue, the Institute of Government, who we've used, is a think tank, and I think is highly respected by all political wings, have calculated that 4.4 billion was spent by early 2020 on Brexit preparations, and they expect by 2021 that we'll spend a further 3.7 billion on these issues. Now, even if we get a deal in the coming weeks, the preparation issues of alerting business to the rules and all the agencies that need to be involved, you, local government, throughout the bits of the country, points of entry and everything else, what are we working with him? Do you feel that that actually, given in light of what's happened with Roche and their fragility of their supply chain to the NHS, is that we're going to see further repeats of that? And can you build that into your COVID-19 preparations around that fragility? Because we've not just got the normal issues of dealing with a pandemic, we're going to have the added issues of the Brexit as we start to settle down. It won't always be like it, but it's coming at the wrong time for this country. It's coming at the wrong time.
As ever, an astute observation. So just to reassure you, the SCG is also being tasked with some of the Brexit preparation stuff, because you're absolutely right, it's linked. There's a link. You gave the really good example with the availability of testing and medicines in relation to what happens there. But it's also, frankly, offensive when you talk about those Londoners who are struggling to make ends meet with what the future holds, the lack of support from the Chancellor, and then be told all this money has been wasted on preparations, as the IIG and others have said. You're absolutely right in relation to this. But there's another point which you failed to mention, which is the impact on businesses. I mean, the mountain of red tape that's going to be created with a basic trade deal, let alone with no trade deal, in relation to regulatory rules they've got to follow, in relation to rules on imports, rules on exports, how you attract talent. The Conservative Party used to be a party of business. I can't think anything more anti-business than a red tape mountain or having no decent trade deal with our biggest trading partner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
I have Assembly Member Curt, who's indicated on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Mr. Mayor, it seems like we're back in 2016 with all of these statements you're making and the points you're putting to the Assembly there. But, you know, obviously we've had 4.5 years since the referendum, and the right thing to do is actually to push ahead and make sure that we come out of the EU properly on the 31st of December. We shouldn't be using COVID as an excuse to delay Brexit for another year and have another year of transition, as you are saying we should do. Don't you see the point that we should actually just come out and get Brexit done, and then we will be free to make our own laws and our own trade deals and to enjoy all the benefits that coming out of the European Union will bring?
Maybe the member can explain the process by which we'll be alerted about a dangerous criminal coming from an EU country to our country. Maybe he can tell me how we'll extradite a dangerous criminal from a country in Europe to our country who's committed a serious offence. Maybe he can explain to me how we're going to share intelligence that we currently receive in relation to passengers leaving and arriving in our country. Maybe he can explain to me the terms of trade for those doing finance, law, professional services, tech or the creative industries.
Well, this is Mayor's question time, so I put the questions to you, Mr. Mayor, rather than the other way around. But, you know, the point is, Mr.
4.5 years, man. How much more time do you need?
Well, the thing is, Mr. Mayor, I mean, your position that you're taking is actually a very, very weak negotiating position. I mean, I'm glad that you're not the chief negotiator, because you're saying, well, if we don't get a deal, then we should just extend for another 12 months. How long does this go on? You've been calling for this for 4.5 years. Extend, extend, extend. You're calling for it now. So we get another 12 months, you'll be calling for it again. Let's extend to 2022, 2025. We've got to actually get on with this, and we've got to get out of the European Union, and we shouldn't be using COVID as an excuse for doing that.
A question, please.
Don't you agree, Mr. Mayor?
I just want to reassure Londoners that I don't agree with this man.
Well, there are many, many Londoners, millions of Londoners who voted for Brexit, so they would agree with me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right, on that note, we move on to next question, which is from Assembly Member Barry on public-private space and the Public London Charter.
Okay, Chair. In November 2017, I said that my new London plan will include a policy to address the public realm and promote the highest level of access to public spaces. I also committed to developing a Public London Charter. Because the Public London Charter is linked to a policy in the plan, we need to get the plan in place to give the Charter its statutory teeth. I published my draft London plan in December 2017, and it includes a policy on public access to public spaces. Since then, the plan has been through a lengthy statutory process towards final publication. Last October, I received the Planning Inspectorate's report and recommendations. In December, I submitted my intent to publish London plan to the Secretary of State. 10 months later, he still hasn't approved it. It's unfortunate that the Secretary of State is holding up the progress of the plan despite having had it since Christmas last year. The Public London Charter cannot be finally adopted until my new London plan is published. While the plan has been sitting with the government, work on the Charter and on policy affecting London's public realm more widely have been moving forward. This includes 2 research projects, one led by Centre for London on how the public realm is managed and used, and the other by the GLA's Intelligence Unit exploring Londoners' perspectives of the public realm. As well as this research, my team has run engagement workshops with a range of stakeholders to help develop the Charter involving My Design advocates, the London boroughs, and organisations such as the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, London, Just Space and the Open Spaces Society. In March, I published an informal draft of the Public London Charter for information, and despite the disruption caused to all our policy work by COVID-19, my team has been preparing the draft charter for formal consultation, which will launch later this month. This consultation will involve further engagement with a range of stakeholders, including community and voluntary sector organisations, to ensure the charter will be robust and useful to all Londoners. Through my Good Growth by Design initiative, I've also developed a good practice design guide for London's public realm, and this will be published in the autumn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I hope you'll see my separate statement backing up your comments on the circuit breaker from earlier. But please forgive my frustration on this issue because the Assembly has been waiting for 3 years. since we passed our motion. And 2 years ago, in response to question 2019-0272, you promised that it would be policy alongside the London plan, and yet we still only have this draft document, which is not policy. It is full of the word should. It is not a policy that can actually be enacted. So I'm very frustrated about this. To cut a long story short, Mr. Mayor, would you like me to draft a policy for you for consultation on this and cut out the middleman?
No.
Because I swear we could have written, the Assembly members here who voted for that motion 3 years ago could have written this policy for you based on existing research and experience from Londoners and got that through consultation and got it into the position of being published alongside the London plan, which is what your answer to my 2019 Mayor's question says.
Maybe where the member can help me is persuading the Secretary of State to finally allow the London plan to do what it's supposed to do. It's been sitting on his desk now for 8 months, and if she wants to help, she can maybe exert some influence on the government.
Over my time, thank you.
You are indeed, thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Devenish on face-to-face GP appointments.
Thank you, Chair. The NHS has responded magnificently to the COVID-19 pandemic. London's GPs have developed a range of innovative solutions to provide advice and treatment with telephone and online consultations, including video, expanding in a way few expected, offering alternative methods of access. During the pandemic, the quick shift to digital appointments has helped slow the spread of the virus by enabling people to seek care from home. This has also helped vulnerable people reduce their risk to exposure. However, while digital appointments can improve access for many, they can also create a barrier to access for others. I therefore share the Assembly members' concern that some of the most vulnerable Londoners may be left behind. Everyone should be able to access their GP in a way that works for them, whether that's online, by phone, or in person. It's crucial that the NHS considers the possible impacts of the digital model on health inequalities, in particular on those who are most likely to face digital exclusion. We know this will largely be older people, but also many others, including people with both physical and learning disabilities and people who speak English as an additional language. I understand the NHS will now be offering a mix of face-to-face, telephone and online GP appointments, and I'm reassured to hear that if patients need to be seen face-to-face, they will be. The NHS must continue to offer face-to-face appointments, and new services and models of care must be designed and planned carefully and with close engagement with the communities who will be most affected. I'll continue to discuss the important issue with NHS London Regional Director, and I'll ask my health advisor, Dr. Tom Coffey, to take this issue up at his next GP roundtable.
Thank you. But in terms of conducting a survey of London GPs directly to see and to encourage them to actually do both face-to-face as well as video appointments, will, as my question says, will you conduct a survey of London GPs to ensure, in addition to utilising video appointments, that you do encourage face-to-face?
So because the NHS will continue to offer the mixed model, I'm not sure what purpose a survey would serve, but I'm, for the reasons you allude to in your question, more than happy for my health advisor to raise it at the GP roundtable. If there's a need to undertake a survey, we can do so, but I'm slightly puzzled as to the point. If it's the case that the NHS is offering the mixed model, for the reasons that we agree on, I'm not sure what purpose a survey serves.
I think it's just one method, Mr. Mayor, to try and use your office to publicise within London that this is very important, because I think we will agree that during COVID, many people were too scared to use the NHS, which is clearly, we could all agree on, is not a good thing. So it's how we can use your office, and maybe, again, I often use this example, but TfL hot hoardings on buses or tubes to encourage people to seek face-to-face medical treatment when necessary.
Chair, I think we're in agreement. So can I suggest my health advisor speaks to the Assembly member to discuss any ideas he's got, because I think we both want the same thing, and we may well agree on the means as well. So rather than giving the impression we don't agree, let me ask Dr. Coffey to speak with Assembly member Devenish and see if we can do what's required.
Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Sure, that's acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we are close to 12:30, so can the Assembly agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed?
Agreed.
Thank you. So we move on to next question from Assembly Member Desai, which is about European security cooperation.
Thank you, Chair. I've recently written to the Home Secretary to once again outline my concerns about the loss of security cooperation. I was disappointed by her response, which indicated the government was satisfied for the UK to fall back on outdated and inefficient procedures. The policing and security benefits of working within the EU have been significant, undoubtedly making cross-border cooperation much more efficient for the Met Police and making Londoners safer as a result. My fear is that we're in danger of sleepwalking into a scenario where our nation is faced with the combined impact of a global pandemic and an unnecessarily damaging separation from the European Union. National policing experts have warned that losing access to the European arrest warrant and to Europol, to name just two examples, will make it harder to keep track of terrorist and serious organised criminal networks. I know that the Met has been working collaboratively to prepare for the effects of Brexit on law enforcement, but I have repeatedly made it clear to the government that any loss of access to the existing tools will unnecessarily risk the safety and security of our citizens by removing access to vital intelligence and our ability to bring offenders to justice.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And sleepwalking indeed. I think you got it right there. So let's look at the European arrest warrant. Acting against the warnings of senior law enforcement officers, the government has said it would not be seeking to participate in this particular scheme as part of its future relationship with the EU. So under an European arrest warrant, the average time for extradition of a criminal wanted in Europe is just 48 days, whereas the Council of Europe 1957 European Convention on extradition, which at present we will fall back on in December, can take up to a year, and in some cases much longer. The loss of this and other tools will irrefutably impact upon the safety of Londoners and the ability of the Met to bring perpetrators to justice. How important is it, Mr. Mayor, that we see cross-party cooperation in lobbying the government to secure continued use of these tools as a matter of priority?
It's crucial. Look, can I say, if you're a criminal, you will be looking forward to next year when there is no European arrest warrant if you want to flee to Europe. You've given a really good example of the compare and contrast. It takes 48 days on average to bring somebody back under the European arrest warrant versus more than a year under an alternative scheme. It'll be slower, it'll be clunkier, it'll be more expensive, and it'll cause huge distress to the victims of crime.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I did note your answers to Assembly Member Curtin, but I think because it's such an important area, I've got to ask you this. Can you remind this Assembly that in the event of a no deal, what would it mean for Londoners in plain terms if we do not get an agreement before the end of the year?
Well, the best I can do is to quote the words of the police officer in charge of our counter-terrorism. And he said, and I quote, "It would create an immediate risk that people could come to this country who were serious offenders and we would not know about it." This is the most senior counter-terror officer in the country. And so what I'd say to those who, for ideological reasons, are obsessed with leaving the EU without a deal or with a poor deal is make sure then, God forbid, if that happens, you own some of the consequences of a no-deal Brexit or a bad-deal Brexit.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Next question is from Assembly Member Dismore, which is on budget challenges to the implementation of recommendations from Grenfell Fire Phase 1, Fire Inquiry Phase 1.
Thank you, Chair. The GLA Group faces a forecast £493 million budget shortfall over the next 2 years due to the impact of COVID-19. Along with the Metropolitan Police Service, I've asked the London Fire Brigade to make the smallest percentage of savings across the GLA Group. When I published my budget guidance in June, I asked the London Fire Brigade to find £10 million in savings in 2020-21 and £15 million in 21-22. I've since decided to use GLA reserves to give extra support to the Fire Brigade, reducing the savings required in 2020-21 to just £5 million. I've protected LFB's budget as much as possible, and I'm now waiting the outcome of their detailed budget work to be submitted in November. The Brigade accepted in full the recommendations of the Phase 1 report and is committed to making the improvements required. I've made it clear to the Commissioner that despite the budget challenges London faces, LFB must continue delivering the Phase 1 recommendations. The Brigade's Transformation Delivery Plan is supporting the effective delivery of actions to address the recommendations of both the Phase 1 report and the issues raised in the report from Her Majesty's Inspectorate. Despite some delays owing to the COVID-19 pandemic, good progress has been made, with the Brigade having taken delivery of the new 32-metre turntable ladders and the 64-metre appliances arriving early next year. But as you know, transforming the Brigade will take time, and this is a long-term programme of work and change.
Well, thank you for that answer. The Grenfell Fire Inquiry Report Phase 1, which was published a year ago, included 14 recommendations directed to the London Fire Brigade, and you rightly committed to implementing them fully, which is being done through the transformation project, which is changing root and branch the way the brigade works. You've also contributed a welcome 2.2 million towards the cost of this. However, recently the Deputy Mayor stated the estimated cost of the transformation project was 4.1 million, whilst the demands on the brigade are ever increasing. The Commissioner recently said, we don't know the full limit of what has happened inside the built environment over the past 10 to 15 years. And residential buildings which have been found to pose considerable danger to life from fire, and not just from ACM cladding that is, now require the Brigade's safety monitoring through fortnightly site visits with clear financial implications for the Brigade. What impact will the proposed reductions to the Brigade's finances have on its ability to deliver on the Grenfell Fire Report recommendations and to complete the transformation project?
Well, it's really important, thank you for your question, it's really important we don't allow the financial situation that we're facing because of COVID-19 to have an impact on the ability of the fire service to do the inspections and the visits that you refer about and the transformation required. I accept it's a big challenge to undertake transformation and make savings and to make sure there aren't consequences on Londoners. The Commissioner reassures me that he will do his utmost to make sure there isn't a compromise in either of those two things, transformation or savings, and I'll be in a position to report back more once he submits the budget response in November.
Well, thanks for that. It is the case, isn't it, that the Brigade has received no additional government funding to help implement Grenfell 1. It's also the case the government previously failed to provide the necessary additional funding soon after the fire, when the then Home Secretary refused the required £6 million for extra equipment and £6 million for revenue costs, for example, for fire safety inspecting officers to restore those cut by Boris Johnson. It's also the case, isn't it, the government voted against Labour's amendment to the Fire Safety Bill, and by doing so refused to give legal force to Grenfell 1 recommendations, which would have required building managers to share information with their local fire service about the design of external walls and materials, carry out regular inspections of lifts and individual flat doors, and share evacuation and fire safety instructions with residents and buildings. Do you think it's fair to say that all this shows the Conservative government to be at best indifferent to supporting the Fire Brigade's work to implement the recommendations of Grenfell and to keep Londoners safe?
Absolutely. Look, and we've seen a situation where there are more obligations being placed on the fire service because of Phase 1 of the inquiry and the HMI report. There are no additional monies from government. In fact, money's been taken away. But at the same time, when the government had a chance to enshrine the Phase 1 recommendations, they voted against the amendment to do so. And you'll be aware from your long experience on the Assembly, and I know you held the previous Mayor to account, the previous Mayor's record of closing down fire stations, I think 10, removing firefighters from our city, I think 550, and removing fire appliances, I think 27. So Londoners know the track record of this Prime Minister when it comes to fire safety. Our job, the Mayor and the Assembly, is to make sure we give our firefighters the resources, support, equipment they need to be able to look after our city.
Assembly Member Bob, you want to come
in? Last Thursday, the Tower Hamlets Development Committee considered an infill development at Brunton Wharf, which would prevent direct access by fire tenders to a block on the estate. Despite the safety concerns of the residents, some of whom live in a 16-storey block, the committee were unwilling to wait for a report by the fire brigade, and they decided to give those plans permission anyway. Will you write to the Mayor of Tower Hamlets expressing your concerns and asking whether Tower Hamlets residents can feel safe with the decisions made by their council?
Chair, I'm really happy for the member to write to me with the details, and I'm more than happy to follow that up.
Point of order, Chair. If I may, point of order.
Yeah, go on.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure the Assembly member doesn't wish to mislead the Mayor or the Assembly, but after what happened at FREP on Tuesday, we looked into the details of the planning decision made by Tower Hamlets, and the Chair of the committee has confirmed that permission was given for the planning, but with a condition attached that construction will not be allowed to proceed unless it has the fire brigade support. And the officers will work with the fire brigade and the applicants to achieve that. So it's not quite as Assembly Member Boff indicated.
Thank you for that helpful intervention, Assembly Member Dismore. Is it good practice to always grant planning permissions and then wait afterwards for the comments of the fire service? I would suggest not, but I would welcome the Mayor's intervention on this merely because Londoners need to feel safe in the properties that are being built.
Well, the condition was attached, and that's quite frequently what happens in planning, as you well know.
Assembly Member Boff, if you can write in with clear details to the Mayor as is indicated,
I will do so, complete with the comments of local residents as well.
Thank you very much. Move on to the next question from Assembly Member Qureshi, which is on supporting leaseholders left mortgage prisoners by EWS1 forms.
Chair, the EWS1 issue has left leaseholders stuck in limbo, and many under immense financial pressure, unable to borrow, sell and move on with their lives. 63% of the nation's high-rise buildings are in London, and more than half of the city's housing stock is flats and maisonettes, so building safety problems affect Londoners disproportionately. But this is a national crisis that requires a national solution. On the 21st September, I wrote on this specific issue to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and I'm still waiting for a response. First and foremost, I'm calling for a long-term funding solution to address the scale of remediation work required to protect leaseholders from costs. The government's £1 billion Building Safety Fund only provides enough funding for around 600 buildings, and there have been nearly 3,000 registration. The government also needs a new system for tracking and enforcing safety check and provide a clearer guidance on EWS1. I've also urged the government to commit to a training and accreditation programme for external wall safety assessments and to address the problems in the professional indemnity insurance market. I'm proud, Chair, to be a signatory of the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign, led by affected leaseholders with input from the survivors of the Grenfell Tower tragedy and Inside Housing. I'll continue to put pressure on the government to resolve this crisis urgently so leaseholders can get on with their lives.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your response. Can I say that when I became the chair of the Housing Committee, I've had the most correspondence on this issue, the cladding scandal. It's stopped people moving, remortgaging, and also added to their annual insurance bills. So it affects, I don't think just thousands, but tens of thousands of Londoners. Now, on that basis, both myself and Andrew Dismore did write to you about a few London-specific proposals, and if I can focus on that, we suggested, for example, the London Housing Task Force be set up, because I think there are some specific things you can do as Mayor. And the first of those is actually, I think, look at HA involvement. It strikes me that there's a high incidence of HA, housing associations, involved in many of these very difficult situations that leaseholders find themselves in. There are examples where shareholders who've only got 25% of the home as ownership have been asked to pay 100% of the remediation costs. I think those kind of things are something you can look into, and I hope you are keen to do that with the undoubtedly involvement of HAs who are acting as freeholders here.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, to be fair, I saw the letter last week, and I will respond in due course, but I think the member has articulated some of the practical problems people are facing because of the complex nature of this, and I will see if there are any London bespoke solutions to try and ameliorate the quality of life for Londoners in the absence of any national response.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. There's another ask I think we can ask in the London context. There's a great difficulty getting data on buildings that are under 18 metres that may have dangerous cladding.
Is it possible for the London Fire Brigade to collect data from their fire safety inspections to be made publicly available?
Chair, I'm happy to look into that. I'm just not aware of what information the LFB have, who owns it, there are issues around data protection, but I'm more than happy to look into what the Assembly Member raises for the obvious reassurance reasons it serves. And I'm happy to write to him in relation to that.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Our just final comment is I think it really does highlight the problems between freeholders and leaseholders and the need for common hold like we have in Scotland. And that's just a comment.
Indeed. Next question from Assembly Member Dismore. Frontline services and reduction in London Fire Brigade finance.
The COVID-19 pandemic has left public finances in a perilous state. We're having to make savings across the GLA family that were totally unexpected this time last year. Despite this, I've been clear that I'll do everything in my power to protect frontline emergency services and their critical public safety roles. That's why, along with the Met Police, I've asked the London Fire Brigade to make the smallest percentage of savings across the GLA group. And I've given the brigade an extra £5 million from GLA reserves to half the savings they need to make this year. I protected the LFB budget as much as possible, and I'm now awaiting the outcome of their detailed budget work in November. The Commissioner has been clear that his overarching aim is never to increase risk to Londoners. He'll continue to ensure the brigade meet its response time standards, with the first fire engine on the scene at an incident within 6 minutes and a second fire engine where needed within 8 minutes on average across London. It's too soon to talk about specifics beyond that at this stage, but I'll be discussing these matters with the Commissioner as his proposals develop. And he'll of course be working with and consulting staff and trade unions throughout.
Well, thank you for that answer. And as you previously mentioned, after Boris Johnson, when he was the mayor, cut over 500 firefighter posts and closed 10 fire stations, when you were elected in 2016, you rightly commissioned the Mayor Review to examine the impact of the Johnson cuts on the LFB's core aims around prevention, protection and response. And so Anthony Mayor reported that the brigade could not face more frontline cuts safely if it was to have the ability to manage effectively civil contingencies as defined in the Civil Contingencies Act. He also said that further cuts would particularly affect capacity to manage new challenges and major incidents where the brigade needed to correspond with the LAS, such as major health emergencies or terrorist attacks. And since he reported, of course, we've seen additional demands due to the consequences of terrorist attacks and the health implications of the virus. And on top of that, above all, the consequences of Grenfell. Do you still agree with Mayor's findings, and do you trust Boris Johnson's government to take seriously the risks that underfunded London Fire Brigade represents?
I think you've raised a really important point. The combination of terrorism, pandemic and the concerns around the built environment mean we've got to be very careful before we make any cuts to the fire brigade. That's why I've said the fewest savings required in the GLA group should be the fire service and the Met Police service. We've had good conversations with the Minister, who the member will know, one Lord Stephen Greenhouse, in relation to this issue. He's the Fire Minister, and it's really important that the Home Secretary and he, as a Fire Minister, give the fire service the resources that they need in an environment where there are additional burdens on the fire service rather than less.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, and it's good that proportionally the brigade has taken one of the least hits in the in-year and next year budget cuts, but they're still facing cuts of 25 million as a result of COVID-19 and its impact on City Hall funding. This is all at a time when demand on the brigade is increasing. For example, the Commissioner overspent on supplies by 5 million for extra PPE. What will you do to ensure there'll be no frontline fire brigade cuts affecting fire and other emergency cover in London?
Yeah, can I say, well, I'll wait and see the Commissioner's budget proposals, but one of the good examples of excellent trade union work is when the fire brigade unions, and other trade unions by the way, are raising their concerns. It isn't just about the safety of their members, it's the safety of Londoners as well. And that's why it's so important that we do right by the fire service, as indeed by the Met Police service. And so I can't comment because I'm not sure of the details, but you're absolutely right to remind me as the Mayor, but also I'm sure the Commissioners, well I know the Commissioner knows this, that we've got to make sure that we deal with any concerns that staff may have, but also to ensure the fire service has the resources, the kit, the tools, the support they need to do their job properly.
Well, thank you for that, and I think it's fair to say that the Fire Brigades Union has always tried to adopt a constructive approach in relation to protecting the public. It's not just about their members. first and foremost, firefighters want to protect the public, rescue the public when they're in danger, and I think it's important that we do recognise that work. Thank you.
Right, that brings us to the last question for the session, which is from Assemblymember Cooper on air quality and the school streets scheme.
Thanks, Chair. As part of our world-leading streets-based programme, over 400 more school streets have been introduced to allow school distancing at the school gate, improve air quality, reduce road danger and incentivise walking, scooting and cycling. Last month I announced a new study that will capture the air quality benefits of these new school streets. Existing evidence already shows schools' streets can reduce pollution, especially at pick-up and drop-off times. One school that introduced a school street as part of my school's air quality audit programme reported a 35% reduction in parents driving to school. Earlier this month, I published new evidence showing the dramatic improvements in London's air quality since I became mayor. This includes a 97% reduction in the number of state primary and secondary schools located in areas exceeding legal limits for nitrogen dioxide from 455 in 2016 to just 14 in 2019. But there's much more work to do before Londoners can breathe clean air. Tens of thousands of Londoners still live in areas that exceed legal limits for nitrogen dioxide, and only 1% of London meets World Health Organization limits for particulate matter. So I'll continue to improve, to work to improve London's air quality, including by expanding the ULEZ up to the North and South Circular Roads in October 2021.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for everything you've done since you were elected in 2016 to push forward with improvements to London's air quality. Now, you mentioned that over 400, in fact 430 schools have signed up for school street projects. They have invested in improving their local air quality with all the associated health benefits for children. It would be beneficial for all schools to be involved, and I just wondered if you had any kind of idea of how many more schools are expected to sign up for the Emergency School Streets project.
Well, look, we're currently negotiating with the DFT for the second half of TfL funding. There's no money left in the monies we have. And what we've done in the meantime also is have a toolkit which can be used by schools and boroughs to bring about school streets. It doesn't cost a lot of money, actually. And so we're hoping that boroughs will work with schools over and above the 431 to get more school streets going.
Yes, I mean, there's clearly some sort of slightly cheaper options that include sort of movable bollards rather than putting in number plate recognition cameras and things like that. Do you have any information about the monitoring that's been going on to make sure that we are getting the schools that are in most need prioritised? Because some schools are nearer to dirtier streets than others, aren't they? Yeah, you're absolutely right. What we can't do is have those schools who have got the keenest head teachers who put in the bids may not need these improvements, getting the resources, and those schools that need it, not getting it. So we're working closely with the boroughs who have been working with their schools who need the changes to apply for the money. And then what we're doing, which you'll be pleased to know, is we're monitoring a selection of schools to see the difference we make, and then we'll be using those lessons to cascade to other schools. As you say, the ambition must be that all schools benefit, not just the 431. No, absolutely. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I just wondered if you'd like to say how important you think retaining the zip card, the under 18 travel card for 11 to 18-year-olds will be in terms, as we go forward with that negotiation with government for funding for TfL. I think it's a great way of keeping pupils out of cars and helping to make London's air cleaner and encouraging them to use public transport to get to school. And is that something you're able to prioritise in that negotiation? Absolutely. Look, let's just think about it. If you're a parent or carer with 2, 3, 4 children, you may choose to drive your children to school or schools rather than paying for public transport, which you'll be required to do if the government gets their way. But also you're giving young people experience of public transport, which you hope they take with them when they become adults as well. But all the evidence is, if you use public transport, you're taking part in active travel, walking to the station, walking to the bus stop, rather than jumping into a car outside your home. And the other point, which is really important, you'll be aware, is it's the poorest Londoners who suffer the worst quality air who use the free under 18s travel. 60% of whom, I beg your pardon, are black, Asian, minority ethnic Londoners. So you're absolutely right. It's really important that we persuade the government to do a U-turn and not take away free travel for under 18-year-olds in London. you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I couldn't agree more. Let's cross our fingers and hope that the government sees sense. Thank you, Chair. I'm finished.
Assembly Member Boff.
Can you write to me on how you will enhance the air quality monitoring arrangements around schools on the routes to the Silvertown Tunnel before, during and after its construction?
Well, I already gave an answer to a previous question. I'm not sure if the member was listening. They had a bad connection. In relation to a question asked by some member Pigeon, which is in addition to the work the air quality team does in relation to nitrogen dioxide, we're going to look into the possibility of also looking at particular matter as well. That will give us an idea of where things are now, but also in the future as well.
I did hear the contribution earlier. She didn't actually ask for you to write to me, which is what I'm asking you.
Right. Well, I take that as a comment, and we leave it at that.
One last flourish.
Right. Look, that ends Mayor's question time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your answers. We move on to next item. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Can we agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Date of next meeting is scheduled for the London Assembly, which will be plenary meeting taking place as a virtual meeting at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 5th of November. And the last item is any other business. I have not been notified of any other urgent business for consideration, so I end this meeting. Thank you very much.
Chair. Thank you.
Chair.